Hey everyone. Welcome back to Hogwarts Tales. Today we're diving into an amazing story called What If Harry Used a Goblin Proxy to Buy the Daily Prophet and Expose Dumbledore's Greater Good Plan. If you love story content like this, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 1, The Black Ledger. The floorboards in the smallest bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive creaked with each push-up, and Harry Potter didn't care. 37. 38. 39. His arms burned. Good. The burning was something to feel that wasn't the cold hollow behind his ribs that had taken up residence since June, since the Department of Mysteries, since 40. 41. He didn't think the name. Thinking the name made the hollow expand, and the hollow expanding made magic bleed out of him in uncontrolled bursts, and the last time that happened he'd shattered every window in his bedroom at 3 in the morning and spent 2 hours repairing them before Vernon could come thundering down the hall. 45. 46. Dawn hadn't broken yet. The sky through his window was that particular shade of bruised purple that meant the sun was still an hour away. Harry had been awake since 2:30, which was an improvement over yesterday, when he'd been awake since 1. His body had settled into a new rhythm since returning to Privet Drive 3 weeks ago, a few hours of sleep punctuated by nightmares, then up in the dark, training. Push-ups, sit-ups, the running he did through the empty neighborhood streets before the muggles woke. Then magic. He finished at 50, rolled onto his back, and stared at the ceiling while his breathing slowed. The stack of books on his desk caught the faint light from the street lamp outside. Practical defensive magic and its use against the dark arts, a gift from Sirius and Remus that he hadn't opened until now. The Wizard's Law, Rights, Responsibilities, and Remedies by Caractacus Burke III, ordered by Owl from Flourish and Blots. Silent Casting, a practical guide, same. The Noble Houses, a guide to Wisengamot politics and wizarding peerage, that one had cost him 12 galleons, but the chapter on the ancient and most noble House of Black alone had been worth it. Harry sat up and reached for his wand. He'd been practicing non-verbal magic for 10 days now. The books all said it required mental discipline and intent, that you had to hold the spell structure in your mind with such clarity that the incantation became unnecessary. Every professor at Hogwarts had told him he lacked discipline. They were wrong. He'd lacked motivation. He pointed his wand at the glass of water on his nightstand. The water rose. Not in a splash, not in a burst, it rose in a smooth column, spiraling like a slow tornado, then settled back into the glass without spilling a drop. Nonverbal Aguamenti reversal. He'd managed it for the first time 2 days ago. Harry allowed himself a small, grim satisfaction. He wasn't training because some prophecy told him he had to. He wasn't training because Dumbledore wanted him ready. He was training because Sirius Black had died in a battle Harry hadn't been prepared for, and Harry would cut off his own wand arm before he let that happen to anyone else. A soft tap at the window broke his concentration. Hedwig sat on the outside sill, a letter clamped in her beak. But she wasn't alone. Beside her perched a small, iron-gray owl he didn't recognize, compact, sharp-eyed, with a brass cylinder attached to its leg instead of a letter. Harry opened the window. Hedwig swooped in and dropped the letter on his bed. The gray owl stayed on the sill, watching him with an unsettling intelligence. Harry reached for the brass cylinder. It was sealed with wax, not ordinary wax, but something that shimmered faintly gold. The stamp pressed into it was a symbol Harry had seen before, 2 crossed axes beneath a gemstone. The seal of Gringotts Wizarding Bank. He cracked it open and unrolled the parchment inside. Mr. Harry James Potter, heir presumptive to the ancient and most noble House of Black, your presence is formally requested at Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Diagon Alley Branch, for the execution of the last will and testament of Sirius Orion Black III, deceased. This reading has been scheduled for July 11, 1996, 10 a.m. Previous delays imposed by external parties have been overridden per Article 77 of the Goblin Wizard Banking Accord of 1402, which states, the final wishes of the deceased shall not be superseded, delayed, or altered by any living party, regardless of station, title, or claimed authority. A Gringotts escort will be provided if required. Reply via the attached courier. Ragnok Director, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Harry read it twice. Then a third time, focusing on one line: previous delays imposed by external parties have been overridden. External parties. Harry didn't need to guess who that meant. He set the letter down and picked up Hedwig's delivery. The handwriting was Remus Lupin's, cramped, tired, familiar. Harry, I hope you're well. I know you're not, but I hope it anyway. I've been informed that Sirius's will reading has been scheduled for the 11th. I'll be there. Dumbledore tried to postpone it again, said you needed time to grieve, that the contents might be distressing. The goblins told him, politely, to sod off. I wish I'd been there to see his face. Nymphadora will be attending as well. She's been named in the will, something about the Black family tapestry and a sum for not hexing Aunt Bellatrix hard enough, but showing admirable spirit. I'll meet you at the Leaky Cauldron at 9:30 if you'd like company. You don't have to face this alone. Remus. Harry folded the letter and set it beside the Gringotts summons. He looked at the grey owl, still waiting on the sill with mechanical patience. He scrawled a reply on a scrap of parchment, "I'll be there," and attached it to the cylinder. The owl departed without ceremony. Then Harry sat on the edge of his bed and did something he'd been doing a lot lately. He thought. Dumbledore had tried to delay the will reading. Twice, apparently. Why? Concern for Harry's grief was the obvious answer, and 6 months ago, Harry would have accepted it. But 6 months ago, Harry hadn't watched a man he loved die because of information Dumbledore had withheld. 6 months ago, Harry hadn't spent hours in Dumbledore's office hearing about a prophecy that the headmaster had known about for 15 years and shared only after Sirius was already cold. Harry didn't trust obvious answers anymore. He dressed, ate the protein bars he'd started buying from the Muggle shop down the road. The Dursleys had not suddenly started feeding him properly, and by the time the sun came up, he'd already run 3 miles through the silent suburban streets with Mundungus Fletcher snoring on his invisible watch post and noticing nothing. The Leaky Cauldron was half empty at 9:30 in the morning, which suited Harry fine. He'd arrived by night bus, stomach churning as always, but it avoided minister-monitored flow connections. He didn't want Dumbledore knowing his movements any more than necessary. Remus was already there, nursing a tea at a corner table. He looked worse than Harry had expected, thinner, grayer, the lines around his eyes carved deeper. He stood when Harry approached, and for a moment they just looked at each other, two people who'd lost the same man and didn't know how to talk about it. "You look older," Remus said. "You look terrible," Harry replied. Remus laughed, a short, surprised sound, like his body had forgotten how, and pulled Harry into a hug. Harry let him. He needed it more than he'd admit. They sat. Tom brought Harry tea without being asked. The silence between them was comfortable in the way that only shared grief could make it. "Have you heard from Dumbledore?" Remus asked. "Not directly. I assume he's monitoring my mail." Remus's expression flickered. "He means well, Harry. I know he thinks he does." Remus studied him over his teacup. Something in Harry's tone had landed. "You've changed. People keep dying around me." It seemed like a good time to start paying attention. Before Remus could respond, the pub door banged open and Nymphadora Tonk stumbled through it, hair a violent shade of pink, robe slightly singed on one hem. Sorry, Dawlish set a filing cabinet on fire, had to put it out, then Kingsley needed, "Doesn't matter, I'm here." She dropped into the chair beside Remus and immediately stole his tea. "Morning, Harry. You look older, apparently." "I was going to say, fit, actually. Have you been working out?" Remus choked on his stolen-back tea. Harry almost smiled. They walked to Gringotts together, the mood shifting as the white marble building loomed into view. The last time Harry had been here, the world had been different. Sirius had been alive. The war had been a rumor. Now the war was a fact, Sirius was gone, and Harry was walking into a bank to hear a dead man's last words. The goblin at the front desk examined Harry's letter, examined Harry, and gestured curtly for them to follow. They were led deep into the bank, past the main hall, past the cart tunnels, into a corridor Harry had never seen before, lined with dark wood and brass fixtures. The air smelled of old metal and something almost like incense. The conference room at the end of the corridor was small and austere, a stone table, 7 chairs, and no windows. A single goblin stood behind the table, middle-aged by goblin standards, with sharp features, long fingers, and eyes like polished obsidian. Mr. Potter. Mr. Lupin. Ms. Tonks. The goblin inclined his head fractionally. I am Grip Hook. I will be overseeing the execution of the Black Estate and all associated matters. Harry recognized him. We've met. You took me to my vault when I was 11. Something shifted in Grip Hook's expression, surprise, maybe, that a wizard remembered a goblin's face. You have a good memory, Mr. Potter. I try. They sat. Harry noticed 2 additional chairs. Who else is expected? Grip Hook consulted a leather-bound ledger. Mrs. Narcissa Malfoy, née Black, and Mrs. Andromeda Tonks, née Black, have been notified. Mrs. Malfoy declined to attend. A pause. Headmaster Dumbledore requested permission to be present in an advisory capacity. Harry's jaw tightened. Did he? He did. Director Ragnok approved his request under Article 12 of the Will Execution Protocol. Interested parties may observe if they do not interfere. Grip Hook's tone carried the faintest edge of something. Disdain, maybe. Or amusement. He should be arriving momentarily. As if summoned by the words, the door opened and Albus Dumbledore entered. He looked, as always, like a man who belonged in a different century, sweeping robes of deep blue, half-moon spectacles, silver beard that could have been used as a scarf. But Harry saw past the costume now. He noticed the way Dumbledore's eyes swept the room, cataloging, assessing, calculating. He noticed the faint tension around his mouth when he saw Harry watching him. Harry, my boy. Warm. Concerned. Perfectly pitched. How are you? Fine, thank you, Professor. I had hoped we might speak privately before. I think we should get started, Harry said, and turned to Grip Hook. Whenever you're ready. A muscle twitched in Dumbledore's cheek. He sat down without another word. The door opened once more and Andromeda Tonks swept in, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of sharp-boned beauty that the Black family seemed to produce alongside its madness. She looked nothing like Bellatrix and everything like her at the same time. She nodded to her daughter, nodded to Remus, studied Harry for a long moment, and sat. We are assembled, Grip Hook said. He opened the ledger. The last will and testament of Sirius Orion Black III, dated March 14, 1996, witnessed and notarized by Gringotts under Goblin law. I will now read the relevant sections. The room went quiet. Harry's hands were flat on the stone table, and he focused on the cold of the stone to keep himself steady. Grip Hook read. Sirius had left Remus a sum of 50,000 galleons with instructions to buy new robes, for Merlin's sake, and eat something. Remus made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Tonks received 30,000 galleons and formal reinstatement on the Black family tapestry. Sirius had apparently taken the time to learn the blood magic required to undo Andromeda's disownment, which meant Tonks and her mother were once again recognized as Blacks. Andromeda pressed her lips together tightly and said nothing, but her eyes were bright. Then Grip Hook turned to the final section. To Harry James Potter, my godson, I leave the remainder of the Black family estate, including all vaults, properties, investments, and holdings, estimated total value, 4,213,000 galleons. A murmur ran through the room. Grip Hook continued without pause. This includes 12 Grimmauld Place, London, and all contents thereof. It also includes the ancestral black seat on the Wisengamot, to be claimed upon Mr. Potter's 17th birthday or emancipation, whichever comes first. Harry heard the numbers. They didn't feel real. He'd grown up sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs, wearing Dudley's tent-sized hand-me-downs. 4,000,000 galleons was an abstraction. A Wisengamot seat was not. Additionally, Griphook said, there is a sealed item, designated as personal effects, with specific instructions. He produced a wooden chest from beneath the table, about the size of a shoebox, dark wood, bound with iron, and sealed with what Harry recognized as a bloodlock. The instructions read, to be opened by Harry alone. Not inspected, not scanned, not touched by anyone else. I mean it, Dumbledore, keep your long nose out of it. Tonks snorted. Even Remus smiled, though it was watery. Dumbledore did not smile. If I may, Dumbledore said, his voice mild. Given the nature of the Black family's collection, it would be prudent to have the chest examined for dark artifacts before, Article 34 of the Goblin Wizard Banking Accord, Griphook said crisply. The contents of goblin-held vaults and estate items are sovereign territory of the account holder. No external party may inspect, seize, or delay access to bequeathed items. Mr. Potter is the account holder. The chest is his. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. Of course. I merely wish to ensure Harry's safety. Gringotts ensures the safety of its clients, Griphook said. It is what we do. The temperature in the room dropped about 3 degrees. Remus shifted uncomfortably. Tonks glanced between Dumbledore and the goblin like she was watching a duel conducted entirely in politeness. Harry stood. Thank you, Griphook. I'd like to open the chest now. Privately. A conference room has been prepared. Follow me. Harry picked up the chest. It was heavier than it looked, and warm, the bloodlock pulsing faintly against his palms. He followed Griphook toward the door. Harry. Dumbledore's voice was gentle. When you've finished, I hope you'll come see me. There are things we should discuss, about the coming year, about your training. I want to help. Harry looked back at him. Dumbledore's blue eyes were doing that thing they did, twinkling, projecting warmth, inviting trust. A year ago, Harry would have felt comforted. Now he saw the calculation behind it. Not malice, Dumbledore wasn't malicious. Something worse. Certainty. The unshakable belief that he knew best. I'll think about it, Harry said, and left. The conference room Griphook led him to was smaller than the first, barely more than a closet, with a single chair, a desk, and a Lumos globe floating near the ceiling. Griphook placed the chest on the desk and stepped back. The bloodlock will respond to your touch. A drop of blood on the seal. He produced a small silver knife. When you are finished, press the call rune on the desk. I will be outside. Harry took the knife. Griphook. The goblin paused at the door. Thank you. For overriding the delays. Griphook's expression was unreadable. The dead have rights, Mr. Potter. We take them seriously. It is wizards who forget that. He stepped out and closed the door behind him. Harry sat down. He looked at the chest for a long time. Then he pricked his thumb with the silver knife and pressed it to the iron seal. The lock clicked. The lid swung open. Inside, packed carefully in dark velvet, were 3 items. A leather-bound journal, thick and well-worn. A bundle of letters tied with string. And a small glass phial containing something silvery white and swirling, a pensive memory. A folded note sat on top of everything, written in Sirius's familiar scrawl. Pup, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I'm going to skip the part where I tell you not to blame yourself, because you will anyway, and you're as stubborn as your mother. I've been investigating Dumbledore. Not because I think he's evil, I don't. I think he's something more dangerous than evil. I think he's a good man who decided a long time ago that the ends justify the means, and he's never stopped to question it since. Everything in this chest is documented and verified. The letters are real, I got them from the Potter family vault, where your parents stored copies of their correspondence. The memory is real, I extracted it from Snape's mind during an order meeting when he was distracted. Don't ask how. Okay, fine, Mundungus helped. Dung's a tosser, but he's a useful tosser. Read the journal first. Then the letters. Then watch the memory. And Harry, trust the goblins before the beards. They'll cheat you on the exchange rate, but they won't lie to your face and call it love. I'm sorry I wasn't there longer. You deserved better than all of us. Padfoot Harry's vision blurred. He blinked hard, breathed through his nose, and set the note aside. He opened the journal. Sirius had started his investigation in late 1994, right after the Triwizard Tournament, right after Voldemort's return. The early entries were fragmented, angry, the writing of a man trapped in a house he hated with nothing to do but think. But they sharpened over time into something focused and methodical. November 1994, asked Dumbledore why he left Harry with the Dursleys. He said blood wards, Lily's sacrifice, protection tied to Petunia's blood. Fair enough. But I checked the Potter's will today. James and Lily named me as guardian. Then Frank and Alice Longbottom. Then Minerva McGonagall. Then literally anyone magical. The will specifically states, under no circumstances is Harry to be placed with Petunia Dursley or her husband Vernon. Dumbledore overrode a legal will. He can't do that, not under wizard law, not under goblin law. So how did he do it? Who let him? January 1995, found the answer. Dumbledore filed for emergency guardianship through the Wizengamot the day after James and Lily died. The session was closed, wartime powers. Barty Crouch Sr. signed off on it. No one challenged it because Dumbledore's word was gospel and Crouch was head of magical law enforcement. The Wizengamot didn't even see the Potter's will. Dumbledore told them Harry needed blood protection and there was only one option. He lied. Or he omitted. Same thing, in the end. Harry's hands were steady. His heart was not. He kept reading. March 1995, the letters are worse. Dumbledore wrote to James in October 1981, a month before they died. He suggested Pettigrew as secret keeper. His exact words, Peter is the least obvious choice, and therefore the safest. Sirius is too predictable. The enemy would expect you to choose your closest friend. James wrote back saying I'd insisted on the switch myself. I did insist, but only after Dumbledore planted the idea with James first. The old man played us. He played all of us. Harry set the journal down. His knuckles were white. He picked up the bundle of letters and untied the string. They were yellowed, 20 years old, written in handwriting he'd never seen but recognized on some instinctive level, his father's angular scrawl, his mother's elegant cursive, and Dumbledore's precise, flowing script. He read them in order. The early letters were warm, Dumbledore advising James and Lily on security measures, discussing the Fidelius charm, praising their courage. Then, in September 1981, the tone shifted. Dumbledore began pressing for specific choices. The secret keeper selection. The location of the safe house. The timing of the charm. Each suggestion was wrapped in layers of warmth and wisdom, but underneath, every choice funneled the Potters toward a single outcome. The last letter from Lily hit Harry like a physical blow. Albus, we've made the switch. Peter is the secret keeper now. James feels better about it, but I'm not sure. Peter's been nervous lately, jumpier than usual. Sirius says it's just Peter being Peter, but something feels wrong. I trust your judgment. You've never steered us wrong. Harry said his first word today. Dog. Sirius is insufferably smug about it. I pretend to be annoyed, but honestly, it's the first time I've laughed in weeks. Thank you for everything, Albus. I know you'll keep us safe. Lily. The date was October 22, 1981. 9 days before she died. Harry put the letter down very carefully, as if it might crumble if he held it too tightly. He stared at the wall. He didn't move for a long time. Then he picked up the glass phial. The memory swirled inside, mercurial, alive, waiting. Harry didn't have a pensieve. But he remembered what Dumbledore had told him in fourth year: memories could be viewed in any sufficiently enchanted receptacle, and goblin-made silver was the most receptive material in existence. He pressed the call rune. Griphook appeared within seconds. Mr. Potter. I need a pensieve. Or something that functions like one. Griphook studied his face. Whatever he saw there, he didn't comment on. Gringotts has viewing basins available for client use. I will have one brought. It arrived in minutes, a shallow basin of black stone lined with goblin silver, smaller than Dumbledore's pensieve but identical in function. Harry poured the memory in. The silver surface rippled, then cleared. I'll need privacy for this, Harry said. Griphook nodded and withdrew. Harry leaned into the memory. He landed in a room he recognized, the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, but wrong somehow. The light was different, colder, and the instruments on the shelves were arranged in an older pattern. Night pressed against the windows. The office door burst open and Severus Snape stumbled through it, younger, wilder, his face a mask of raw, desperate grief. You said you would keep her safe. Dumbledore stood behind his desk. He looked younger too, the beard was shorter, the face less lined. But his eyes were the same. Ancient. Calculating. Sad. Lily and James put their faith in the wrong person, Severus. Rather like you. You said, Snape's voice cracked. He fell into a chair, his body folding in on itself. You said the Fidelius would hold. You said Peter was the right choice. I said Peter was the least obvious choice. I could not have predicted his betrayal. Even in the memory, Harry heard the careful framing. Not a lie. Not quite the truth. Something in between. The boy, Snape said, and the word was heavy with a loathing Harry recognized. The boy survived. He did. Dumbledore sat down slowly. And that survival has created a complication that I need your help to understand. He explained it then. The curse scar. The connection he could feel between Harry and Voldemort, not just the failed killing curse, but something deeper. Darker. A fragment of Voldemort's soul, torn loose by the act of murder and latched onto the only living thing in the room. Snape listened. His face went from grief to horror to something colder. You're telling me the Dark Lord made the boy into one of those things. Those abominations. A Horcrux. Yes. Unintentionally, I believe, but the result is the same. Then the boy is dead already. You cannot destroy a Horcrux without destroying the vessel. I'm aware of that, Severus. Silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the castle, a clock chimed. You can't mean to let him live, Snape said slowly. Not with that thing inside him. On the contrary. I intend to let him live for as long as possible. He must grow. He must be shaped. When the time comes, when Voldemort returns, as he inevitably will, the boy must walk willingly to his death. It is the only way. Snape stared at him. You're raising him like a pig for slaughter. Dumbledore flinched. It was small, a tightening around the eyes, a brief spasm in the hand resting on the desk, but it was real. I am trying to save the world, Severus. If you have a better plan, I am genuinely eager to hear it. And the boy? What of him? The boy must not know. Not until the very end. He must come to it freely, the sacrifice must be willing, or the magic will not work as it needs to. You're playing God, Albus. No. God would have a better option. I am merely playing the hand I was dealt. The memory dissolved. Harry pulled his face from the basin and sat down heavily in the chair. The room was very quiet. The Lumos globe above him cast a cold, steady light. The shadows didn't move. Harry's mind was doing something strange. He'd expected rage, the volcanic fury that had consumed him in Dumbledore's office after Sirius died. He'd expected his magic to lash out, shattering things, breaking the careful control he'd been building. Instead, there was clarity. Cold, surgical, absolute. Dumbledore had known since Harry was 1 year old that Harry was a Horcrux. He had deliberately raised Harry in ignorance, in neglect, in conditions designed to make him humble and self-sacrificing rather than informed and empowered. Every choice, the Dursleys, the withholding of information, the yearly tests that put Harry in mortal danger, the refusal to train him properly, all of it was part of a design. Not malicious. Not cruel for cruelty's sake. But calculated. Methodical. The work of a man who had weighed a child's life against the world and found it wanting. And the worst part, the part that sat in Harry's chest like a stone, was that Dumbledore might be right. The Horcrux might require Harry's death. The sacrifice might be necessary. But Dumbledore had made that choice for him. Without consent, without knowledge, without even the basic dignity of honesty. He'd looked at a baby in a crib and decided that baby's death was acceptable, and then he'd spent 15 years making sure the baby would agree. Harry thought about Sirius's note. Trust the goblins before the beards. He thought about 4 million galleons and a seat on the Wizengamot. He thought about the Daily Prophet, the paper that had called him a liar, called him unstable, called him an attention-seeking child. The paper that printed whatever the ministry told it to print, whatever Dumbledore's allies wanted, whatever would keep the public docile and uninformed. The paper that could have told the truth about Voldemort's return a year earlier and saved lives. The thought arrived fully formed, as if it had been waiting in his skull for weeks, needing only this final piece to crystallize. He pressed the call rune. Griphook appeared. Mr. Potter. Are you, how much would it cost to buy the Daily Prophet? Griphook blinked. It was, Harry suspected, the first time a wizard had ever surprised him. The Daily Prophet is owned by the Selwyn family, Griphook said slowly. It is not, to my knowledge, currently for sale. Everything's for sale if the price is right. That's what goblins believe, isn't it? That is a crude generalization. A pause. It is also accurate. I want to buy it. I want my name nowhere near the transaction. And I want to meet with Director Ragnok to discuss how. Griphook studied him. The black eyes were unreadable, but Harry could feel the gears turning behind them, the rapid assessment, the calculation of risk and reward. Director Ragnok does not typically take meetings with 16-year-old wizards, Griphook said. But I suspect he will make an exception. Wait here. He left. Harry sat in the silence and began to plan. They brought him to Ragnok's office through passages that Harry was fairly certain no wizard had seen in centuries. The corridors were carved from living rock, lit by veins of something luminescent in the stone itself, not torches, not magic, something older. The air got warmer as they descended. Drier. The smell of metal grew stronger. Ragnok's office was nothing like what Harry expected. No desk. No chair. The director of Gringotts conducted his business from a raised stone platform in the center of a circular chamber, standing behind a table that was less a piece of furniture and more a slab of polished granite with documents spread across it like a battlefield map. The walls were covered in hammered metal panels, gold, silver, bronze, iron, each one etched with scenes that Harry assumed were goblin history. Wars, mostly. Goblins liked to remember their wars. Ragnok himself was old. That was the first thing Harry noticed, not old in the way Dumbledore was old, with the theatrical silver beard and the deliberate display of age as wisdom. Ragnok was old the way mountains were old. His skin had the texture of worn leather, his hands were gnarled and powerful, and his eyes were black and sharp and utterly devoid of the performative warmth that wizards used as social currency. He did not greet Harry. He did not offer him a seat, there were no seats. He looked at him, looked through him, and waited. "Director Ragnok," Harry said. "Thank you for seeing me. Griphook tells me you wish to purchase the Daily Prophet." Ragnok's voice was deep, graveled, accented. "He also tells me you wish to hide your involvement behind a goblin shell company. This is either very clever or very foolish. Convince me which." No preamble. No small talk. Harry liked that. He adjusted immediately. The Daily Prophet controls public opinion in Wizarding Britain. Whoever controls it controls the narrative. Right now, it's owned by the Selwyns, who are incompetent, and it's influenced by the Ministry and by Dumbledore, who are not. I want to change what it prints. Not to propaganda, to truth. Truth. Ragnok said the word like he was testing its weight. A flexible concept among your kind. Not the way I mean it. I have evidence that Albus Dumbledore has manipulated Wizarding Society for decades, violated legal wills, suppressed prophecies, made secret alliances with people like Snape, and planned to sacrifice a child to win a war. All documented. All verifiable. Ragnok's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a predator scenting something interesting. "And you wish to publish this evidence?" "I wish to publish it in a paper I own, through an editorial team I trust, in a way that the Ministry and Dumbledore can't suppress or discredit." Why should the Goblin Nation involve itself in wizard politics? Harry had been expecting this question. He'd thought about it during the long walk down through the passages, and he'd realized that the only currency a goblin would accept was honesty. "Because I'm going to tear down the people who've kept your people in chains," Harry said. "And I'm going to do it with the truth. All I need is a printing press." The chamber was very quiet. Ragnok moved around his granite table. He was shorter than Harry, most goblins were, but his presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with height. He stopped 3 feet from Harry and looked up at him with those ancient black eyes. "You are not the first wizard to promise goblins better treatment. You will not be the last. Every promise before yours has been broken. I'm not promising better treatment. I'm offering a business arrangement. You create a holding company, goblin-owned, goblin-controlled, that acquires the profit. I provide the capital. The company provides the shield. If this works, the power structure that keeps goblins as second-class citizens takes a hit. That's not a promise. That's an alignment of interests." Ragnok regarded him for a long moment. Then he did something Harry hadn't seen a goblin do before, he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been playing chess for centuries and had just seen an interesting new piece appear on the board. "You are not what I expected, Harry Potter. I get that a lot. Griphook will handle the details. The holding company will be called Obsidian Press, a name that reveals nothing and suggests strength. Your identity will be protected by Goblin Blood Oath. No wizard compulsion, no veritaserum, no legilimency will extract the information from any goblin involved. This is our standard for sensitive clients." "And the cost?" "The acquisition cost will depend on the Selwyn's asking price and the competitive landscape. Our fee for facilitating the arrangement will be 12% of the total transaction value." 8%. Ragnok's smile widened by a fraction. 10%. "And you owe the Goblin Nation a favor, to be called in at a time of our choosing." Non-negotiable. Harry hesitated. An open-ended favor to the goblins was a dangerous thing. But he thought about the memory he'd just watched, Dumbledore deciding a baby should die, and the hesitation passed. "Agreed." Ragnok extended a gnarled hand. Harry shook it. The goblin's grip was stronger than it looked, much stronger, and Harry felt something pass between them. Not magic, exactly. Something older. An understanding. Griphook will contact you within 48 hours with initial projections, Ragnok said. I suggest you prepare for the possibility that this will not be a simple purchase. The Selwyns have debts, but they also have pride. And other parties will be interested. Other parties? The Ministry has been making noises about state-controlled media since Fudge's departure. And the Malfoy family has been quietly approaching the Selwyns for months. Harry absorbed this. Malfoy meant Voldemort. The Dark Lord wanted the Prophet too. Then we'd better move fast, Harry said. Indeed. Ragnok turned back to his granite table, the audience clearly over. One more thing, Mr. Potter. You spoke of truth. I will hold you to that. Goblins have long memories and little patience for hypocrisy. If you use this paper to become what you claim to fight, you will find that our alliance has a very short lifespan. Understood. Good. Griphook, escort Mr. Potter out. The long way, I don't want anyone seeing him leave from this level. Griphook materialized from the shadows near the door. As they walked back through the stone passages, Harry noticed the goblin glancing at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something on your mind? Harry asked. You negotiated with Director Ragnok, Griphook said. Wizards don't usually negotiate with goblins. They demand. I'm not most wizards. No, Griphook agreed. You are not. A beat. This is either going to be very profitable or very dangerous. Can't it be both? Griphook made a sound that might have been a laugh. Harry decided not to push his luck by asking. He returned to Privet Drive by night bus, his mind racing faster than the lurching triple-decker. The chest was shrunken in his pocket. He'd asked Griphook to apply the charm, since Harry couldn't do underage magic outside Hogwarts without triggering the trace. Another thing on his list, getting the trace removed. The goblins probably knew how. Everything was a transaction with goblins, and Harry was rapidly learning that he preferred transparent transactions to Dumbledore's invisible ones. He was barely through the front door of number 4 when he heard Aunt Petunia's sharp intake of breath from the kitchen and Vernon's blustering voice from the living room, and then a third voice, calm, warm, resonant, that stopped Harry cold in the hallway. Ah, Harry. I was hoping you'd return soon. Dumbledore was sitting in Vernon Dursley's favorite armchair. He had a cup of tea. Harry had no idea how he'd gotten Petunia to make it, and was smiling with the patient benevolence of a man who had all the time in the world. Vernon and Petunia were in the kitchen doorway, looking as though they'd been told the house was infested with dragons. Dudley was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding upstairs. Professor. Harry kept his voice neutral. Controlled. I wasn't expecting you. I apologize for the surprise. I wanted to speak with you after the will reading, but you left Gringotts rather quickly. The blue eyes twinkled. The goblins can be quite efficient when they choose to be. Harry walked into the living room and sat on the sofa opposite Dumbledore. Every muscle in his body was tense, but he kept his posture relaxed. This was a performance, he realized. Everything with Dumbledore was a performance. The difference was that now Harry knew it. How was the reading? Dumbledore asked. Sirius was generous. He loved you very much. As we all do, Harry. A pause, perfectly timed. I noticed there was a sealed chest among the bequests. I hope the contents weren't disturbing. Harry almost admired the elegance of it. Not what was in the chest. That would be too direct, too suspicious. Instead, a gentle probe disguised as concern. An invitation to share. Some personal effects, Harry said. Letters. A journal. Nothing dark. I'm relieved to hear it. The Black family has a complicated legacy. Dumbledore set his teacup down. Harry, I know this has been a difficult summer. Serious as death, I'd rather not talk about that. Of course. Not a flicker of irritation. Pure patience. Then perhaps we can discuss the coming year. I'd like to offer you private lessons when you return to Hogwarts. Lessons in what? In Voldemort. His history, his nature, his weaknesses. There are things you need to understand, things I should have told you sooner. I recognize that now. Harry studied Dumbledore's face. The old man looked sincere. He probably was sincere, at least partially. Dumbledore had always had the ability to be genuinely honest about small things while lying about the ones that mattered. Harry thought about the memory. The boy must die, Severus. He thought about his mother's last letter. I trust your judgment. You've never steered us wrong. He made a decision. Not the decision his anger demanded, not the confrontation, the accusation, the satisfying explosion. A different decision. A strategic one. I'd like that, Harry said. Thank you, Professor. Dumbledore's smile deepened. The relief in his eyes was real. He'd been worried that Harry's defiance from June would persist, that the angry boy who'd smashed the office instruments had hardened into something unmanageable. Instead, here was Harry, grieving but cooperative, ready to be guided. Harry felt sick. But he smiled back. There is one other matter, Dumbledore said. I'll be collecting you from the Dursleys before the start of term. I have an errand I'd like your help with. An old colleague of mine, Horace Slughorn. I'm hoping to persuade him to return to teaching. Of course. Wonderful. Dumbledore rose. I'll leave you to rest, then. Harry, I know trust must be rebuilt. I intend to do that this year. You have my word. Your word, Harry thought. Your word was what convinced my parents to trust Peter Pettigrew. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. Dumbledore left through the front door like a normal person, which Harry suspected was a deliberate choice to avoid startling the Dursleys any further. The moment the door closed, Vernon erupted from the kitchen with a face like a boiled beetroot, sputtering about freaks and trespassing, but Harry was already halfway up the stairs and didn't hear a word. He closed his bedroom door, locked it with a twist of intent that he felt resonate through the wood, wandless magic, rough and untrained but functional, and sat down at his desk. He pulled out parchment and a quill. He wrote 2 letters. The first was to Remus. Remus, thank you for today. I need you to do something for me. Find out everything you can about the Daily Prophet's ownership structure, staff, and financial situation. Who writes for them, who edits, who makes the decisions. Don't ask why yet. I'll explain soon. Also, do you know anyone who's a qualified journalist? Someone young, independent, and angry at the right things? Harry II was to Neville. Neville, I need to talk to you. In person, somewhere private. Can you get to the Leaky Cauldron next week? Come alone. This isn't about school. This is about what happened to your parents, and my parents, and why. Harry he sent both letters with Hedwig, who nipped his finger affectionately before vanishing into the night sky. Then he sat in the dark and thought about what he was doing. He was 16 years old. He was going to buy a newspaper. He was going to expose the most powerful wizard in Britain. He was going to do it while a dark lord hunted him and a prophecy marked him for death. The rational part of his mind, the part that sounded uncomfortably like Hermione, told him this was insane. He was a student. He had no experience in politics, journalism, business, or espionage. He was up against a man who had been playing this game for over a century. But the other part of his mind, the part that had faced a basilisk at 12, a dragon at 14, and Voldemort himself at 15, pointed out that he'd never been qualified for any of the things he'd survived. He'd gotten through on instinct, stubbornness, and the refusal to accept the role others had written for him. Dumbledore wanted him to be a weapon. Voldemort wanted him to be a victim. The Ministry wanted him to be a symbol. The public wanted him to be a hero. Harry wanted to be something none of them had accounted for, informed. He pulled out the Wizarding Law book and opened it to the chapter on media regulations. He had a lot to learn and very little time to learn it. Far to the north, in a clearing in the Scottish Highlands where the moonlight didn't quite reach the ground, a different kind of meeting was taking place. The werewolves had gathered in a loose circle, 40 or 50 of them, gaunt, wary, their eyes reflecting the firelight with an animal gleam. They were not, strictly speaking, a pack. Packs implied structure, territory, belonging. These were outcasts. Cast out by wizarding society, denied jobs, denied wands, denied the basic dignity of being considered human 27 days out of 30. The figure who stood before them didn't look like much, pale, skeletal, red-eyed, with a voice like silk drawn over a blade. But he radiated power the way a furnace radiated heat, and even the werewolves, who feared very little, kept their distance. "The Ministry offers you nothing," Voldemort said. "Dumbledore offers you pity. I offer you what you actually want." Fenrir Greyback stood at the front of the group, massive, scarred, grinning with too many teeth. "And what's that, then?" "Recognition. Territory. Freedom to be what you are without apology. Pretty words." Dumbledore said pretty words too, through his pet wolf. "Lupin." Greyback spat. "A traitor to his own blood. Lupin chose the wizards over his own kind. I would never ask you to make such a choice. Serve me, and you will have land, the forests north of Inverness, warded against Ministry intrusion. You will hunt as you please. You will answer to no wizard law." The werewolves murmured among themselves. Greyback's grin widened, but his eyes were calculating. Even Greyback, for all his savagery, understood power dynamics. "And what do you want in return?" "Soldiers. When I call, you come. When I point, you kill." "We would have done that for free," Greyback said. "The killing part, anyway." Voldemort smiled. It was not a human expression. "Then we have an accord." He turned and walked into the darkness, and the shadows swallowed him like he'd never been there. Behind him, Greyback turned to his wolves and began to organize them with brutal efficiency. They were soldiers now. They had a purpose. The war was building. And while Harry Potter planned his revolution from a small bedroom in Surrey, and Albus Dumbledore planned his chess game from a tower in Scotland, the Dark Lord was building an army that neither of them was ready for. 2 days later, Griphook's owl arrived at midnight. Harry opened the brass cylinder and unrolled the parchment. It was dense with figures, projections, and the particular brand of precise language that goblins used when they were being thorough. The summary was clear: the Selwyn family was in debt. Badly. Years of poor investments, gambling losses. Cassius Selwyn had a well-known problem with dragon racing, and the declining revenue of the Prophet itself. Readership had dropped 20% since the Ministry had lost credibility during the Fudge years, had left them vulnerable. The family owed Gringotts 340,000 galleons in outstanding loans. They owed other creditors roughly the same. The Prophet itself was valued at approximately 1.5 million galleons, but the Selwyns would likely accept less if the offer came with enough speed and certainty. There were complications. Lucius Malfoy had been making quiet inquiries through a law firm called Greengrass and Associates. Malfoy was offering 1.2 million. The Ministry, under new Minister Rufus Scrimgeour, had floated the idea of national security acquisition, essentially a government seizure with compensation, which would require a Wisengamot vote that Scrimgeour probably couldn't get. Griphook's recommended approach was elegant in its ruthlessness: Gringotts would call in the Selwyns' outstanding debts. All of them. Immediately. This would create a liquidity crisis that made the sale of the Prophet not just attractive but necessary. Obsidian Press would then make an offer of 1.8 million galleons, well above market value, generous enough to clear all debts and leave the Selwyns comfortable. The premium would look like a bargaining sweetener. In reality, it was insurance. at that price, no rational seller would choose Malfoy's lower offer, and the Ministry's seizure plan would become politically untenable. There was a handwritten note at the bottom, in Griphook's angular script: "The Malfoy offer is being routed through Greengrass and Associates. The senior partner, Cyrus Greengrass, has a reputation for political neutrality. His daughter, Daphne, attends Hogwarts. This may be useful information." Harry filed that away and drafted his reply. "Proceed with the acquisition as outlined. Authorize the full 1.8 million from the Black Vault. Move fast, I don't want Malfoy or the Ministry to have time to counter. One question, the favor I owe Director Ragnok. Is there a time limit?" Griphook's reply came the next morning, terse and slightly amused: "Goblins do not believe in time limits, Mr. Potter. We believe in patience. The acquisition process has begun. Expect completion within 2 weeks. Incidentally, the Selwyns have been informed that their Gringotts debts are due." Cassius Selwyn's response was reportedly quite colorful. "I found it entertaining." Harry almost laughed. Almost. He spent the next 2 weeks preparing. He read every issue of the Prophet from the past year, studying its rhythms, its biases, its weaknesses. He identified which journalists had talent, few, which had integrity, fewer, and which were simply mouthpieces for whoever paid them, most. He read Wizarding Law on press freedom. There was surprisingly little, which was both a problem and an opportunity. He wrote letters to Neville, who had agreed to meet, to Remus, who was gathering intelligence on the Prophet's staff, and to Fred and George Weasley, who he suspected might be useful allies, given their natural talent for disruption. He did not write to Ron or Hermione. Not yet. He loved them both, but he knew, with a certainty that hurt, that Hermione would try to talk him out of it and Ron would be confused. He needed allies who would commit, not friends who would argue. There would be time for arguments later. At night, he trained. Nonverbal casting was becoming more natural. He could manage shield charms, disarming charms, and stunners without speaking. He practiced the spells he'd learned from the DA and added new ones from the defense books: reductor curses, cutting hexes, a particularly nasty bludgeoning curse that the book warned was borderline dark and not recommended for academic settings. Harry didn't care about academic settings. He cared about surviving. On the morning of July 25, 1996, Griphook's owl arrived with a single sheet of parchment. "It is done. Obsidian Press Limited has completed its acquisition of the Daily Prophet for 1.8 million galleons. All contracts are signed and filed with the Department of Magical Commerce. Standard procedure: your identity remains protected. The Selwyns have been compensated in full." Lucius Malfoy's counteroffer was rejected by the Selwyns' financial advisor, who, coincidentally, is a goblin. "You own a newspaper, Mr. Potter. I suggest you decide what you want to print." Harry read the message twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the chest alongside Sirius's journal, the letters, and the pensive memory. He looked at the clock. It was just past midnight. Through the window, the sky was clear and full of stars, the same stars that his father and mother had looked at, the same stars that Sirius had watched from the window of Azkaban for 12 years. He was 16 years old. He owned the most powerful media outlet in magical Britain. He had evidence that could topple Albus Dumbledore and reshape the wizarding world. He had the backing of the Goblin Nation, the fortune of 2 ancient houses, and the cold, clear fury of a boy who had been lied to for his entire life. Tomorrow, the work would begin. He'd need editors, writers, a distribution strategy, a plan for the inevitable backlash. He'd need to decide what to publish first, how fast to escalate, how to protect his people. He'd need to be smarter and more disciplined than he'd ever been in his life. But tonight, he allowed himself one moment. He held Sirius's note, the one from the chest, the last thing his godfather had written to him, and read the final line again. "You deserved better than all of us." "I'll try to be," Harry said to the empty room. Then he put the note away, picked up his quill, and started planning. Griphook's words echoed in his mind as the quill scratched against parchment in the silent house. You understand, Mr. Potter, that once this begins, it cannot be undone. Harry kept writing. Neither can what he did. Chapter 2, Hostile Takeover. The leaky cauldron's back room smelled like old beer and older secrets, which made it the perfect place for what Harry had in mind. He'd arrived 20 minutes early, taken the table in the far corner where the shadows pooled thickest, and ordered 2 butterbeers. Now he sat with his back to the wall and his wand in his lap, not drawn, but close, and watched the door. Neville Longbottom walked in at exactly 2 o'clock, which surprised Harry not at all. Neville had always been more punctual than people gave him credit for. More everything than people gave him credit for, really. The boy who walked through the door was taller than Harry remembered from June, broader in the shoulders, with a sunburn across his nose that said he'd been spending time outdoors. His eyes, though, were the thing that had changed most. They were steady. Focused. The perpetual nervousness that had clung to Neville like a second skin for 5 years was gone, burned away in the Department of Mysteries. Harry. Neville sat down, glanced at the butterbeer, and took a long drink. Your letter scared the hell out of Gran. Sorry about that. Don't be. She's been scared since the Department of Mysteries. She just shows it by polishing the family silver and muttering about blood traders. Neville set his bottle down. You said this was about my parents. And yours. It is. Harry reached into his jacket and pulled out a sheaf of parchment, copies of the key documents from Sirius's chest. He'd spent 2 days at Grimmauld Place reproducing them with a copying charm that Griphook had taught him, leaving the originals in the Gringotts vault where no one could touch them. Before you read these, I need you to promise me something. What? That you'll hear me out before you react. Neville studied his face. Whatever he saw there, it made him go still. That bad? Worse. Harry pushed the documents across the table and watched Neville read. He watched the color drain from his friend's face as he worked through Sirius's journal entries, the overridden will, the manipulated secret keeper selection, the blood ward justification. He watched Neville's jaw clench when he reached the section about the Longbottoms. Dumbledore had known that Bellatrix Lestrange was targeting Alice and Frank specifically, had intelligence from Snape that could have been used to set a trap or increase their protection. He'd chosen instead to keep Snape's cover intact. The Longbottoms had been tortured into insanity 3 days later. Neville set the papers down. His hands were flat on the table, pressed hard enough that his knuckles were white. Tell me about the memory, he said quietly. The pensive memory you mentioned in the journal. Harry told him. All of it. Dumbledore's words to Snape. The boy must die. The calculated raising of a child for slaughter. The greater good. Neville was quiet for a long time. The pub noise filtered through the door, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loudly, the scrape of chairs on stone. In the back room, the silence was heavy enough to lean on. My parents are in St. Mungo's, Neville said finally. They've been there for 15 years. My mum gives me sweet wrappers every time I visit. She doesn't know who I am, but she saves them. She saves them in her pillowcase, and when I come, she puts them in my hand like they're precious. Harry said nothing. There was nothing to say. Dumbledore could have stopped it. He had the information and he chose not to use it. Neville's voice was controlled, terrifyingly so. This wasn't the boy who trembled in Snape's classroom. This was something else entirely. What do you need? I bought the Daily Prophet. Neville blinked. You, what? Through a goblin holding company. Nobody knows it's me. I'm going to use it to publish the truth about everything, Dumbledore, the Ministry, the war. All of it. I need people I trust, and the list is very short. How short? You're the first person I've told. Neville picked up his butterbeer and took a slow drink. He set it down, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and nodded once. "What do you need?" he said again. Harry let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Right now? I need someone to help me interview an editor. And I need someone who'll watch my back while I figure out what the hell I'm doing. I can do both." Neville paused. "Harry, when this comes out, Hermione's going to lose her mind." "I know. And Ron's going to be confused." "I know that too. And Dumbledore." Neville stopped. Thought. Started again. "Dumbledore is going to come for you. Not with a wand. With words and disappointment and that voice he uses when he wants you to feel like you've let down the entire world." "I know." "Right." Neville stood up. "When do we start? How do you feel about Hogsmeade tonight?" Elara Vance lived in a bedsit above Scrivenshaft's quill shop, which was either poetic or depressing depending on your perspective. The narrow staircase creaked under Harry's feet as he climbed, Neville 2 steps behind. The landing smelled like ink and cat, and the door at the top was painted a shade of blue that might once have been cheerful but had faded to something closer to resignation. Harry knocked. The door opened on a chain. A single dark eye peered through the gap, suspicious, sharp, framed by a mess of brown hair that hadn't seen a brush recently. "Who are you and why are you knocking on my door at 9 o'clock at night?" "My name is Harry Potter. I'd like to talk to you about a job." The eye blinked. The door closed. Harry heard the chain rattle, and then the door swung open properly. Elara Vance was 24, thin in the way that people who forgot to eat were thin, and had the kind of angular face that was more interesting than pretty. She wore a jumper with ink stains on the sleeves and an expression that suggested she was 3 seconds from slamming the door again. "Harry Potter," she said flatly. "The Harry Potter. Just the one, as far as I know. The one who the prophet called delusional, attention-seeking, and potentially dangerous. That's the one." She looked past him at Neville. "And you are?" "Neville Longbottom. Augusta's grandson. The one who fought Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries." Neville straightened slightly. "Yeah." Elara looked between them for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. Don't touch anything on the desk." The bedsit was exactly what Harry expected, tiny, cluttered, dominated by a desk piled so high with parchment, newspapers, and reference books that it formed a small mountain range. The walls were covered with pinned articles, notes, and a web of string connecting various headlines to names and dates. It looked like the office of someone who was either investigating something important or losing her mind. Possibly both. "Remus Lupin told me you were a journalist," Harry said, moving a stack of papers off the only other chair so Neville could sit. He stayed standing. "Freelance. I used to write for the Prophet before they fired me for asking questions they didn't want answered." Elara crossed her arms. "Remus is a good man. He helped my family during the First War. My cousin Emmeline, she was order." "You knew that?" Harry nodded. "Emmeline Vance." He'd met her briefly, a quiet woman with kind eyes. "I'm sorry about what happened to her." Something flickered across Elara's face, grief, quickly controlled. "She was murdered this summer. Death Eaters. The Order was supposed to be watching her." The words carried a weight that said she'd been carrying them for weeks. Nobody was watching. Nobody told her that her cover was blown. She found out when they kicked down her door. The parallel to the Longbottoms wasn't lost on Harry, and from the look on Neville's face, it wasn't lost on him either. "How much do you know about what's been happening with the Daily Prophet's ownership?" Harry asked. Elara's eyes sharpened. She was, Harry realized, the kind of person whose intelligence showed most when something caught her interest. "I know the Selwyns sold it last week. The buyer is a holding company called Obsidian Press, Goblin registered, which is unusual. The Ministry's furious because they wanted to buy it themselves. Malfoy's furious because he was outbid. Half the staff has been panicking because they don't know who their new boss is. She tilted her head. But you know all that already. Because you're the new boss. Harry stared at her. Neville let out a low whistle. She's good. It wasn't difficult. Elara shrugged, but there was a hint of satisfaction in it. A goblin holding company with no wizard name attached, capitalized well enough to outbid Lucius Malfoy, that takes real money. Old money. The kind that comes from ancient family vaults. Harry Potter just inherited the Black Fortune, and Harry Potter has more reason to want control of the profit than anyone alive. She paused. Also, Remus Lupin doesn't send people to my door unless it's something big, and the biggest thing happening in Wizarding Britain right now is the profit sale. Harry made a decision. He'd come here planning to feel her out, test her, offer the job gradually. But Elara Vance had just read him in 30 seconds, and he respected that too much to waste her time with games. I want you to be the editor-in-chief of the Daily Prophet. Silence. Then Elara laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. You're insane. People keep telling me that. I'd like you to hear what I'm planning before you decide. He told her. Not everything, not the Horcrux, not the pensive memory, but enough. The manipulations. The overridden will. The pattern of control that stretched back decades. The plan to use the Prophet not as a propaganda tool but as an actual newspaper, publishing verified truth, holding power accountable, giving the wizarding public the information they needed to make their own decisions. Elara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a minute, staring at the web of string and headlines on her wall. Why me? She asked. You could hire a dozen editors with more experience. Name one who hasn't been bought, bullied, or blackmailed into compliance at some point. She conceded the point with a tilt of her head. I need someone who'll print the truth even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's inconvenient for me. Harry met her eyes. I'm not looking for a mouthpiece. I'm looking for an editor. Someone who'll tell me I'm wrong when I'm wrong. You mean that? Test me and find out. Elara stared at him for a long moment. Then she walked to her desk, pulled open a drawer, and produced a bottle of fire whiskey and 3 glasses. She poured. I have conditions, she said. Let's hear them. Editorial independence. Full and absolute. You own the paper, you set the general direction, but I choose what we print and how we print it. The moment you try to kill a story because it's politically inconvenient, I walk. Agreed. I pick my own staff. The current Prophet team is mostly dead weight, sycophants and cowards. I want to build something real. Agreed, with one exception. There's someone I want you to use. You won't like it. Elara's eyes narrowed. Who? Rita Skeeter. The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. Neville winced. Elara's expression went from wary to murderous in the span of a heartbeat. Rita Skeeter, she said, is a lying, manipulative parasite who wouldn't know journalistic integrity if it bit her on the. She's also the best investigative reporter in Wizarding Britain, and I have leverage over her that ensures she'll behave. What kind of leverage? She's an unregistered animagus. A beetle. She's been using it to spy on people for years. If she crosses a line, I send the evidence to the DMLE and she goes to Azkaban. Elara processed this. The fury faded, replaced by something colder and more calculating. You'd use her like a weapon. I'd use her like a tool. Point her at targets, give her the evidence to work with, and let her do what she does best, tear people apart on the page. She just won't be choosing her own targets anymore. And if she goes rogue? Then you fire her and I destroy her. But she won't. Rita's a survivor. She'll work within whatever system keeps her out of prison. Elara took a long drink of fire whiskey. She looked at Harry over the rim of the glass with an expression that had shifted from suspicion to something approaching respect. You're not what I expected, Potter. I've been hearing that a lot lately. Third condition. She set the glass down. I want the full story. Whatever you're holding back, and you're holding back something big, I can tell, I want it eventually. Not now, not tomorrow, but when the time is right, I want the whole truth. If I'm going to put my name and my career on this, I need to know what I'm standing on. Harry hesitated. The pensive memory was his nuclear option, the weapon he couldn't fire until the moment was right. But Alara was right, she couldn't lead a revolution blind. When the time comes, he said, you'll be the first to see it. You have my word. She studied him. Then she picked up the fire whiskey bottle, topped off all 3 glasses, and raised hers. Well, then. Here's to career suicide and righteous fury. When do I start? Yesterday, Harry said. Good. She drained her glass. Because I've been writing an exposé on Dolores Umbridge for 3 months and I've been dying for somewhere to publish it. Harry looked at Neville. Neville grinned, the first real grin Harry had seen from him all summer. It was the grin of someone who'd found something worth fighting for. They clinked glasses. Rita Skeeter lived in a flat in central London that was nicer than it had any right to be, which told Harry everything he needed to know about the profitability of blackmail and gossip. He went alone for this one. Neville's temper was too honest for the kind of conversation Harry needed to have, and Alara might have hexed Skeeter on sight. The door opened before he knocked. Rita stood in the entrance in acid-green robes, her blonde curls stiff with lacquer, her jeweled spectacles perched on her nose. She looked like she'd been expecting him, which she probably had. Rita's beetle form gave her access to information that most people couldn't dream of. Harry Potter. She smiled the way a cat smiles at a cornered mouse. What a delightful surprise. Come in, come in. I was just writing the most fascinating piece about. Sit down, Rita. Something in his tone made the smile falter. Rita sat. Harry remained standing. He didn't do it to intimidate her, well, not entirely. He did it because sitting with Rita Skeeter felt like getting comfortable with a viper. I know about the beetle, he said. I've known since 4th year. Hermione worked it out, and she told me, and I've been sitting on it because I didn't have a use for you. Now I do. Rita's smile was gone. In its place was something Harry hadn't expected, not fear, but calculation. She was assessing the situation the way a chess player assessed a threatened queen, with speed and without sentiment. What do you want? She asked. No pretense now. No theatrical warmth. This was the real Rita Skeeter, sharp, pragmatic, and dangerous. I own the Daily Prophet. Rita's eyes widened. For the first time in their acquaintance, Harry saw genuine surprise on her face. She recovered in 2 seconds. The Obsidian Press acquisition. That was you. That was me. You're 16 years old. And you're an unregistered animagus who's been conducting illegal surveillance for decades. We all have our quirks. Rita laughed, a real laugh, startled and almost appreciative. You've grown up, Potter. I've had reasons to. Harry sat down across from her. The dynamic had shifted, and they both knew it. Here's what I'm offering. You come work for the Prophet. Full staff position, byline credit, the biggest stories in Wizarding Britain. No more freelancing, no more sneaking. Everything above board. And the catch? You write what we tell you to investigate. No more inventing quotes, no more quick quotes, cool fiction, no more destroying innocent people for clicks. You investigate real targets with real evidence and you write the truth. If you lie, fabricate, or go rogue, your animagus status gets sent to the DMLE, and I will personally testify at your trial. You're threatening me. I'm negotiating with you. There's a difference. The threat is the stick. The carrot is this: the stories I'm going to give you are bigger than anything you've ever written. Bigger than the Triwizard Tournament, bigger than the Ministry cover-up. I'm talking about the kind of stories that win awards and get carved into history. You'll be famous, legitimately famous, for the first time in your career. Rita removed her spectacles and cleaned them slowly. Without them, her eyes were smaller, sharper, more honest. What kind of stories? Government corruption. Institutional failure. The secret history of Albus Dumbledore. The spectacles stopped moving. Rita looked at him with an expression Harry could only describe as hunger. You're going after Dumbledore. I'm going after the truth. Dumbledore's just where the trail leads. Rita put her spectacles back on. The calculation was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, excitement. The kind of excitement that came from a predator being shown a hunting ground. I want a private office at the Prophet, she said. Not a desk in the bullpen. Done. I want a research assistant. Someone competent. Talk to Elara. She's the editor-in-chief. Elara Vance. Rita's lip curled. That idealistic little, she's your boss. Deal with it or don't, but those are the terms. Rita stared at him. Then, slowly, the smile returned, not the predatory smile from before, but something sharper and more genuine. The smile of a professional who'd been offered the assignment of a lifetime and was too smart to turn it down. You know, she said, your mother would have hexed me into next week for what I wrote about you during the tournament. She would have done worse than that. Probably. She was a terror, Lily Evans. Rita stood and extended her hand. I'm in, Potter. But for the record, I'm not doing this because you're threatening me. I'm doing this because it's going to be the biggest story of the century, and I'd rather be writing it than reading about it. Harry shook her hand. Welcome to the Prophet, Rita. One condition. I'm running out of patience for conditions. This one's easy. When you go after Dumbledore, and I can see that's where this is heading, I want to be the one who writes the main piece. Not Vance, not some staff hack. Me. Harry considered it. Rita Skeeter writing the Dumbledore exposé would give it teeth, her acid style would ensure no one could ignore it. But it would also make it easier to discredit, given her reputation. You and Elara. Joint byline. She provides the credibility, you provide the venom. Take it or leave it. Rita's smile widened. You really have grown up. Deal. 3 days after hiring his editor and his attack dog, Harry went shopping in Diagon Alley. It wasn't the kind of shopping he was used to, no cauldrons, no schoolbooks, no robes. He was there to see the Prophet's offices in person, to understand the physical space he now owned, and to walk the streets of Wizarding Britain's commercial heart with the eyes of someone who was about to shake it to its foundations. He went under a glamour. Tonks had taught him the charm during a quiet meeting at Grimmauld Place. She'd agreed to help him with certain practical skills without asking too many questions, partly because she trusted him and partly because she was angry enough about Sirius to want someone, anyone, to pay for it. The glamour gave him brown hair, a slightly rounder face, and no scar. He looked like any other teenage wizard, unremarkable and invisible. The Prophet's offices were on the east side of Diagon Alley, occupying a 3-story building that had once been grand and was now merely large. The brass plate by the door read The Daily Prophet, EST 1743, and the windows on the ground floor showed the bustling chaos of a newsroom, owls swooping between desks, enchanted typewriters clattering, stacks of parchment moving themselves from desk to desk in what appeared to be a filing system designed by someone who hated efficiency. Harry stood across the street and watched. He noted the entrances and exits, front door, service entrance on the side, owl access on the roof. He noted the wards, standard ministry grade, which meant they were decent but not exceptional. He'd have Griphook upgrade them within the week. He was so absorbed in his observation that he almost walked directly into someone coming out of Flourish and Blots. Watch it. A sharp voice, female, annoyed. Sorry. Harry stepped back, and the book she'd been carrying, the one he'd knocked from her hands, landed at his feet. He picked it up automatically and glanced at the title. Wizarding Media Law, a comprehensive guide. The girl who'd been carrying it was his age, maybe a year younger, tall, blonde, with aristocratic features and gray eyes that were currently fixed on him with an expression of irritated appraisal. She wore robes of dark green, expensive, understated, the kind that said old money without screaming it. A silver serpent brooch was pinned to her collar. Harry knew her by sight, though they'd never spoken. Daphne Greengrass. Slytherin. Quiet, clever, politically neutral in a house that was anything but. He'd seen her in classes for 5 years and knew almost nothing about her, which in retrospect said more about the stupidity of Hogwarts house divisions than it did about either of them. He held out the book. Interesting reading material. She took it back. It's research. For what? Her eyes narrowed, not with hostility, but with the automatic wariness of someone who'd grown up in a world where information was currency and strangers asking questions were never just curious. Family business. Who are you? Nobody interesting. Everyone's interesting. Most people are just boring about it. She studied him with an intensity that made Harry feel like he was being catalogued. You're not from around here. Your accent's local but your clothes are Muggle-adjacent. Muggle-born? Half-blood? Does it matter? To me? No. To about 40% of the people on this street? Unfortunately, yes. She tucked the book under her arm. You were staring at the Prophet Building. Damn. She was observant. Was I? For about 5 minutes. Most people walk past it without a second glance. It's not exactly architecturally inspiring. The corner of her mouth twitched. Are you a journalist? No. A disgruntled subscriber? Something like that. Then you'll be interested to know that the Prophet just changed hands. Some goblin company bought it, nobody knows who's behind it. The staff are in a panic, the ministry's been making threatening noises, and Lucius Malfoy is reportedly furious, which is one of my favorite states of Lucius Malfoy. She was watching his reaction carefully. Whoever bought it is either very brave or very stupid. Can't they be both? In my experience, the overlap is distressingly common. She held out her hand. Daphne Greengrass. Harry shook it. Her grip was firm and her palm was cool. Nice to meet you. You didn't give me your name. No, I didn't. She raised an eyebrow. It was, Harry had to admit, an impressively expressive eyebrow. Mysterious. How thrilling. The sarcasm was pitch perfect, dry enough to start a fire. Well, Mr. Nobody Interesting, if you're going to lurk outside the Prophet offices, I'd suggest doing it less obviously. You've attracted the attention of at least 2 ministry workers across the street, and the one in the grey hat is almost certainly an informant for Scrimgeour's office. Harry glanced over. She was right. A man in a grey hat was watching the Prophet Building with the studied casualness of someone who'd been told to watch it. Thanks for the tip, Harry said. Don't mention it. I collect favors the way some people collect chocolate frog cards. She adjusted the book under her arm and started walking. Then she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Your glamour is slipping, by the way. Left side, near the ear. Harry's hand went to his face. She was right, the charm was fraying at the edge, and for a split second, the skin near his temple had rippled, showing a flash of dark hair where the glamour projected brown. Daphne watched the flicker with sharp, knowing eyes. If she caught a glimpse of the scar beneath, she gave no sign. But the look on her face, controlled, calculating, not surprised, told Harry that she'd already worked out more than she was letting on. Better fix that, she said. Have a pleasant afternoon, Mr. Nobody. She walked away into the Diagon Alley crowd and disappeared. Harry watched her go and felt something he hadn't expected, the first stirring of genuine interest. Not romantic interest, not yet, though he'd have to be blind not to notice she was striking. Professional interest. Political interest. Daphne Greengrass moved through the world like someone who understood its machinery, and that was exactly the kind of expertise Harry lacked. He filed her away in the growing mental cabinet of useful people and turned his attention back to the Prophet building. He had work to do. The work was considerable. Over the next 4 days, Harry lived at Grimmauld Place. He'd claimed the townhouse immediately after the will reading, a decision that required spending an entire afternoon cleaning dark artifacts out of the master bedroom with Creature's reluctant assistance and Neville's steady, uncomplaining help. The house was grim, haunted by bad memories and worse wallpaper, but it was his, and more importantly, it was unplottable and warded against unwanted visitors. Dumbledore still had residual access from the Fidelius charm he'd cast when the Order used it as headquarters, but Harry had asked Griphook about that, and the Goblin was working on a solution involving Goblin-forged ward stones that would override the existing protections entirely. Elara moved into the Prophet offices on a Monday morning. She walked through the front door, introduced herself to the existing staff as the new editor-in-chief, and fired 6 people before lunch. She told Harry about it that evening over takeaway curry at Grimmauld Place. Neville had introduced her to Muggle delivery food, which she declared the single greatest achievement of non-magical civilization. Barnabas Cuff had been running the editorial desk for 20 years without a single piece of investigative journalism that wasn't planted by the ministry, she said, pulling apart a non-bread with more force than strictly necessary. He actually said to me, "We don't challenge the government, dear, we support it." Dear. He called me dear. What did you do? Neville asked. I fired him. Then I fired his 2 deputies, his personal assistant, the sports columnist who turned out to be writing match results 3 days before the matches happened because he was too lazy to attend, and a witch in the printing department who'd been embezzling ink supplies for the past decade. Elara took a bite of curry. The rest of the staff are terrified, which is exactly where I want them. Anyone worth keeping? Harry asked. A few. The international correspondent, Marcus Belby, has actual talent. He's been wasted on filler pieces about Quidditch exhibitions in Sweden. There's a young photographer named Colin Creevey. Harry couldn't help the groan. Creevey, yes. He's eager. Annoyingly eager. But he's got a good eye, and more importantly, he's not afraid to go where the story is. Elara wiped her hands on a napkin. Rita reported for duty this morning. We had a conversation. How bad was it? She called me a naive idealist who would get the paper sued into oblivion. I told her she was a hack with the ethics of a doxy. We reached an understanding. A thin smile. She's actually quite brilliant when she's not making things up. I gave her the Umbridge file and told her to verify everything independently. She came back 4 hours later with 3 additional sources I hadn't found and a quote from a Hogwarts house elf who witnessed Umbridge using the blood quill on a first year. Harry set down his fork. A first year? A Muggle-born first year. 11 years old. The house elf said the child cried so quietly that Umbridge didn't even notice. Elara's voice was steady, but her eyes were hard. That's our first piece. Front page. We run it on Saturday. The room was quiet for a moment. Neville was staring at his plate, jaw tight. Harry thought about the scars on the back of his own hand, I must not tell lies, and felt the old anger pulse like a second heartbeat. Run it, he said. And make sure the copy goes to Amelia Bones at the DMLE before publication. Give her 24 hours to act before we print. If she moves on it, we report the arrest. If she doesn't, we report the failure. Elara nodded. That's actually smart. You're better at this than I expected. Low bar, Harry said. Very low bar, Neville agreed. Harry threw a piece of naan at him. Neville caught it and ate it without missing a beat. The Umbridge story broke on Saturday morning, and the world cracked. Amelia Bones, to her eternal credit, had moved. The moment she received the advance copy from Elara, sent by Goblin courier, untraceable, with a cover letter that said simply, "This will be on the front page in 24 hours. Act accordingly." Bones had dispatched Aurors to Umbridge's home in Kensington. They found her packing for a sudden holiday in Switzerland. The headline read, "Blood on the Desk, Umbridge's Secret Torture of Hogwarts Students." Rita Skeeter's byline. Ilara's editorial oversight. Every claim sourced, documented, and verified. The piece included Harry's own testimony, given under his real name, because this was one story where he wanted his face attached. The scars on his hand were photographed and published alongside identical scars from 11 other students. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Howlers flooded the ministry by the hundreds. Parents who'd sent their children to what they believed was a safe school discovered that those children had been tortured by a government appointee with the full knowledge and implicit approval of the former Minister of Magic. Cornelius Fudge, already disgraced, became a target of renewed public fury. Scrimgeour, the new minister, scrambled to distance himself from his predecessor's crimes. He held a press conference condemning Umbridge and pledging a full investigation, which was good politics and terrible substance, since Scrimgeour had been head of the Auror office during Umbridge's tenure and had done exactly nothing. The prophet printed his press conference on page 6, beneath an article detailing exactly how many warning signs the ministry had ignored. Harry read the morning edition at the kitchen table in Grimmauld Place, surrounded by the debris of a working breakfast, empty teacups, parchment, and the remains of toast that creature had made with the sullen competence of an elf who was slowly, grudgingly, beginning to take pride in his work. "It's good," Harry said. "It's really good." "Don't sound so surprised." Ilara's voice came through the enchanted mirror that Griphook had provided, a communication device that was vastly more secure than the Floo network and didn't require kneeling on a hearth. "We've had more than 200 subscription requests since dawn. Our owl service is overwhelmed. I've had to hire 12 additional delivery owls and I'm still running behind. Any pushback?" Ministry sent a formal complaint about irresponsible journalism. I sent back a formal invitation for them to indicate which specific claims were inaccurate. They haven't responded. A pause. Dumbledore hasn't said a word. Publicly. He won't. Not yet. He'll wait to see what else we print before he decides how to respond. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting. I want to run the next piece on Wednesday, the first installment of the Dumbledore series. Rita's working on it now. Harry's stomach tightened. This was the step that changed everything. Umbridge was a warm-up, a target everyone could agree was monstrous. Dumbledore was different. Dumbledore was beloved. Going after him would split the wizarding world down the middle. "Do it," Harry said. "But let me see the copy before it runs. You'll have it tomorrow night." The mirror went dark. Harry sat in the silence of the old house and listened to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock that had been counting time for the Black family for generations, marking the hours of the powerful, the mad, and the dead. His people were in place. His paper was running. The first blow had landed. Now came the real fight. But before the fight, there was an ambush. It happened 2 days later. Harry had gone to Nocturn Alley to meet with a goblin courier, Griphook's assistant, a wiry young goblin named Bogrod who handled the financial paperwork that flowed between Obsidian Press and Gringotts. The meeting was brief, signatures on advertising contracts, revenue projections, a report on the ministry's latest attempt to subpoena Obsidian Press's ownership records, blocked by the goblins under banking sovereignty laws. Harry left the meeting at dusk, moving through Nocturn Alley with his glamour in place and his wand in his sleeve. He'd learned to carry it there instead of in his back pocket, faster draw, less chance of losing it in a fall. The alley was mostly empty. The shops that catered to the darker end of wizarding commerce were still open, Borgin and Burke's, a shop that sold cursed jewelry, a potion supplier whose front window displayed ingredients that were definitely not legal, but the foot traffic was thin. Most people avoided Nocturn Alley after dark, which was exactly why Harry's meetings were scheduled there, fewer eyes. He felt the wards shift before he saw them. It was subtle, a change in air pressure, a dampening of ambient sound, the way background magic goes flat when someone erects an anti-disapparition jinx. Harry had spent weeks studying defensive magic, and the signature of a containment ward was unmistakable. Someone had boxed him in. He didn't run. Running triggered pursuit instincts. Instead, he slowed, shifted his weight to the balls of his feet, and let his wand drop from his sleeve into his hand. They came from both ends of the alley, two figures in dark cloaks, masks gleaming white in the fading light. Death Eaters. Not the inner circle, these were the new recruits, the hungry ones, eager to prove themselves. The one in front was tall, heavy-set, moving with the confidence of someone who'd been told this would be easy. The one behind was smaller, quicker, wand already raised. "Don't move," the tall one said. "Someone wants to talk to you, Potter." Harry's glamour was still in place. They shouldn't have been able to identify him, which meant either the glamour had been breached or they'd been following Bogrod and tagged Harry when they met. Probably the latter. The goblins were going to be furious. "You've got the wrong person," Harry said. "Buying time. Assessing the terrain." The alley was narrow, maybe 10 feet wide, stone walls on both sides, no doorways within immediate reach. The containment ward extended roughly 50 feet in each direction, based on where the sound dampening started. "Nice try." The tall one raised his wand. "Lucius sends his regards." Malfoy. Of course. He'd lost the bidding war for the Prophet and he'd sent goons to find out who'd beaten him. This wasn't about killing Harry, it was about intelligence. Which meant they wanted to take him alive. Which meant they'd hesitate to use lethal force. Harry wouldn't. He moved. The first spell came from the smaller one behind him, a stunner, red light streaking through the dusk. Harry was already dropping, the spell passing over his head as he twisted and fired a non-verbal reductor curse at the stone wall to his right. The curse hit a drainage pipe and the resulting explosion of stone and rusty metal fragments turned the narrow alley into a hailstorm of shrapnel. The tall Death Eater threw up a shield. The small one wasn't fast enough, a chunk of stone caught him in the shoulder and he staggered, cursing. Harry didn't give them time to recover. He rolled to his feet and hit the tall one with a bludgeoning curse that cracked through his shield like a hammer through glass and caught him square in the chest. The man flew backward, hit the opposite wall, and slid down it with a wheeze. The small one was back up, wand arm working despite the bleeding shoulder. A cutting curse hissed past Harry's ear, close, too close, he felt the heat of it. Harry sidestepped and fired 3 spells in rapid succession, a disarming charm, a leg locker, and a stunner. The Death Eater blocked the first 2 but the stunner caught him as he was moving his shield to cover the hex, slamming into his hip. He crumbled. The tall one was getting up. Tougher than he looked. He ripped off his mask, underneath was a face Harry didn't recognize, square-jawed, furious, and raised his wand with both hands. "You little," Harry pointed his wand at the potions shop window beside the Death Eater and blasted it inward. The window shattered, and behind it, a shelf of volatile ingredients, fire salamander blood, erumpent fluid, something in a black jar that Harry didn't recognize but smelled like sulfur, cascaded onto the alley floor. The erumpent fluid hit the stone and detonated. The explosion wasn't huge, erumpent fluid in small quantities produced more force than fire, but in the narrow alley, it was devastating. The concussive wave threw the tall Death Eater off his feet and slammed him into the wall a second time. He didn't get up. Harry stood in the settling dust, breathing hard, ears ringing. His wand arm was steady. His heart was hammering, but his hands weren't shaking. He checked both Death Eaters, alive, unconscious, breathing. He summoned their wands and snapped them in half. Then he noticed Griphook standing at the mouth of the alley. The goblin was utterly still, his black eyes fixed on Harry with an expression that Harry had never seen on a goblin's face before. Not fear. Not surprise. Something closer to reassessment, the look of someone who'd been filing you under one category and was now hastily creating a new one. They breached the containment protocol, Griphook said. They followed Bogrod. I figured. You'll want to shore up your courier routes. Indeed. Griphook stepped into the alley, examining the unconscious Death Eaters with clinical disinterest. You could have killed them. I don't kill people. Yet. Harry looked at him. Griphook looked back. The word hung between them like a blade. Let's hope it stays that way, Harry said. Can you get them to the DMLE without this leading back to me? Easily. Goblin law enforcement encounters dark wizards in our territory all the time. These two will be found bound and wandless in a public area with no memory of how they got there. Griphook paused. I'll tell Director Ragnok about this. He'll want to increase your security detail. I don't need, Mr. Potter. You are the single largest account holder in Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Your death would be catastrophic for our quarterly earnings. You will accept a security detail and you will be gracious about it. Harry blinked. Then he almost laughed. Only a goblin would frame protection as a financial consideration and somehow make it impossible to argue with. Fine. Griphook nodded once and began the business of cleaning up the alley with an efficiency that suggested this wasn't his first time disposing of inconvenient bodies. Harry left through the back entrance that Griphook indicated, glamour refreshed, adrenaline still singing in his veins. Two thoughts competed for dominance as he walked back through Diagon Alley in the falling dark. The first, Malfoy was onto him. Not his identity specifically, the Death Eaters had used his name, but that might have been a guess based on the Black Fortune and the timing of the acquisition. Either way, the opposition was mobilizing. The second, quieter but more persistent, the fight had been easy. Not painless, his ribs ached where he'd hit the ground, and his left ear was still ringing from the explosion, but easy. Two adult Death Eaters, and he'd put them both down in under a minute. He wasn't the same boy who'd barely survived the graveyard. He wasn't even the same boy who'd fought at the Department of Mysteries. Something had changed in those weeks at Privet Drive, the push-ups, the non-verbal practice, the cold focus that had replaced the undirected anger. He was getting stronger. Faster. Sharper. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Not against Voldemort. But it was a start, and for the first time in his life, Harry felt like his growth was something he was choosing rather than something being done to him. The first issue of the Daily Prophet under Obsidian Press's full editorial control, not just the Umbridge piece, but the first issue that represented the new direction, hit newsstands on a Friday morning, and the changes were deliberate and unmistakable. Gone were the screaming headlines and the lurid speculation. Gone were the gossip columns disguised as news and the ministry press releases reprinted verbatim as journalism. In their place was something that Wizarding Britain hadn't seen in decades, actual reporting. The front page carried 3 stories. The lead, an in-depth analysis of the ministry's war readiness, based on DMLE staffing records that the Prophet had obtained through a Freedom of Information request, a legal mechanism that existed in wizarding law but had literally never been used by the press before. Elara had found it buried in a statute from 1847. The analysis was devastating. The Auror Corps was at 60% strength, the hit Wizard Division hadn't been funded properly since Fudge took office, and the Dementor withdrawal from Azkaban had left the prison guarded by a skeleton crew of wardens who were, according to anonymous sources, already being courted by Voldemort. The second story was a feature on the Muggleborn registration files that the Ministry had been quietly compiling, not yet a formal registry, but the bureaucratic groundwork for one. The piece didn't editorialize, it simply presented the documents and let the reader draw conclusions. The third was an editorial by Elara Vance herself, titled, "What is the Press For?" It argued, simply and powerfully, that the Daily Prophet had failed its readers for decades by serving as a propaganda arm of the ministry rather than an independent check on power. It promised change. It didn't ask permission. Below the fold, a small notice: the Daily Prophet is now editorially independent. We are not affiliated with the Ministry of Magic, any political faction, or any individual. Our obligation is to the truth and to our readers. If you have information about wrongdoing, abuse of power, or corruption, contact us in confidence. Our sources are protected by Goblin Oath. That last sentence was Griphook's suggestion. It was brilliant. Goblin oaths were inviolable, everyone knew that. The promise of genuine source protection, backed by goblin magic, was something no wizarding institution had ever offered. Within a week, the Prophet's anonymous tip line was receiving more than 100 messages a day. The response from the public was a mixture of enthusiasm, confusion, and suspicion. Owls flooded the Prophet's offices, letters of support from Muggleborns and half-bloods who'd never felt represented, angry letters from pure-blood families who saw the new direction as an attack on tradition, and a significant number of letters that simply said some variant of, "Who are you people and what have you done with the Prophet?" The response from the ministry was more pointed. Scrimgeour sent a formal communication expressing concern about unvetted reporting that may compromise national security. Elara published the communication in full, alongside a response pointing out that the ministry's definition of national security had recently included covering up the return of a Dark Lord for an entire year. Scrimgeour didn't write again. Dumbledore said nothing publicly. But Harry, through Tonks, learned that the headmaster had convened an emergency order meeting to discuss the Prophet's new direction. The order was divided. Some members, including, to Harry's surprise, Kingsley Shacklebolt, thought the press independence was overdue and healthy. Others, Molly Weasley, most vocally, were convinced it was dangerous and destabilizing. Snape had reportedly called it the inevitable result of letting children play with power they don't understand, which Harry found almost funny coming from a man who'd pledged his life to two different masters. The order hadn't figured out who owned Obsidian Press. Neither had the ministry. The Goblin Wall was holding. For now. She found him on a Tuesday afternoon. Harry was sitting in Fortescue's, or rather, the outdoor tables that had belonged to Fortescue's before Florian's disappearance, now operated by a nervous young wizard who made inferior ice cream but at least kept the chairs clean. Harry was reviewing the next day's edition on enchanted proofs that Elara sent him daily, articles that appeared as blank parchment to anyone but him, thanks to a clever bit of goblin enchantment. The shadow that fell across his table was deliberate. He looked up. Daphne Greengrass stood there, looking exactly as she had in Flourish and Blots, polished, controlled, and approximately 3 steps ahead of whatever conversation was about to happen. She was carrying a copy of that morning's Prophet, folded open to the editorial page. "May I?" She gestured at the empty chair. "Help yourself." She sat with the economical grace of someone who'd been trained from childhood in how to occupy space without appearing to claim too much of it. Pure blood etiquette, Harry recognized it now, after reading the Wisengamot Guide. Everything in the upper echelons of wizarding society was choreographed. "I've been reading the new Prophet," she said. "It's remarkable. Whoever is running it has either excellent judgment or a death wish. Why not both? There it is again." She tilted her head. "You said that last time too. You have a pattern, Mr. Nobody Interesting." Her grey eyes held steady on his. "Or should I say, Mr. Potter?" Harry didn't react. Years of Dursleys, Snape, and Voldemort had given him a decent poker face. "That's quite an accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's an observation." Daphne folded her hands on the table. "Your glamour slipped last time we spoke. I saw the scar. I didn't say anything because I was curious to see what you'd do, and you didn't disappoint. You spent the rest of the afternoon casing the Prophet building like a burglar planning a job." She paused. "Then, 3 days later, the Prophet undergoes the most dramatic editorial transformation in its 250-year history. The timing is suggestive." "Suggestive isn't proof." "No. But I didn't come here to prove anything. I came to offer my help." Harry studied her. She was good, very good. The directness was a strategy in itself. By laying her cards on the table, or appearing to, she was signaling that she was too smart for games and too valuable to be treated as a mark. "Why would you want to help me?" Because my family has been neutral for 2 generations, and neutrality is becoming a luxury we can't afford. The Dark Lord is recruiting. The Ministry is flailing. Dumbledore is," she paused, choosing her words. "Dumbledore is fighting a war the way he fights everything, alone, in the dark, moving pieces without telling them they're on a board. I grew up watching my father navigate that system. I know how it works. I know where the pressure points are. And I know that whoever is behind the new prophet is going to need someone who speaks fluent wizarding politics, because right now they're swinging a sword when they need a scalpel." Harry leaned back in his chair. "Your father's firm, Greengrass and Associates, was handling Malfoy's bid for the prophet." A flicker of something crossed her face, annoyance, maybe, or an acknowledgement that Harry wasn't as ignorant as she'd assumed. "My father takes all clients. It's how neutrality works, you serve everyone and owe no one." But he didn't know who Malfoy was buying for, and when he found out, he dropped the account. "That's a big claim. It's a verifiable one. Ask your goblin contacts, Gringotts will have the contract termination on file." She held his gaze. "I'm not my father, Potter. I'm not interested in serving everyone. I'm interested in backing the right side before the war forces me onto the wrong one. And you've decided I'm the right side. I've decided you're the most interesting side. The rest remains to be seen." They looked at each other across the table. The street noise of Diagon Alley filled the space between them, shoppers, owls, the distant clatter of Gringotts carts. Harry was aware, in a detached way, that this was a pivotal moment. Not because of the politics, although the politics were significant. Because of something else, something in the way she held herself, the intelligence behind her eyes, the fact that she'd walked up to a stranger she'd identified as Harry Potter and offered to join his revolution with the same calm she might have used to order tea. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't awed by him. She wasn't trying to use him, or if she was honest enough about it to make the transaction transparent. He made a decision. "I don't know what you think I'm planning," he said carefully, "but if I were planning something, hypothetically, what would you bring to the table?" Daphne's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Something more contained and more real. "Hypothetically, I'd bring a working knowledge of every family in the Wisengamot, their alliances, their debts, their skeletons. I'd bring fluency in pure-blood social protocol, which you need because you fight like a Gryffindor but you're trying to play a Slytherin's game. I'd bring connections in the neutral families, the Devisas, the Zabinas, the Knots, who are terrified of Voldemort but don't trust Dumbledore and are desperate for a third option." She paused. "And I'd bring the ability to tell you when you're being an idiot without worrying about hurting your feelings." "How do you know I'm an idiot?" "You're sitting in a public cafe reviewing what appear to be enchanted documents with a glamour that has, once again, started slipping near your left ear." Harry's hand went to his face. She was right. Again. "You should really get that looked at," Daphne said. "It's a manufacturing defect in the charm. Tonks's variant uses a metamorphic anchor that degrades near body heat concentration points. The ears are the worst. Try the continental method instead, it uses a different root spell and holds better over extended periods." Harry stared at her. "How do you know about glamour charm variants?" "I read." She stood. "Think about my offer, Potter. You know how to find me." She reached into her robes and produced a small card, cream parchment, embossed with a simple DG in dark green. "Or you could just send an owl like a normal person. But I suspect normal isn't really your style." She left the card on the table and walked away, disappearing into the crowd with the ease of someone who'd been practicing invisibility long before she learned magic. Harry picked up the card. It was warm from her pocket. He turned it over. On the back, in small, precise handwriting, "Your glamour is slipping again. Fix it before you leave." He fixed his glamour, pocketed the card, and sat for a long time thinking about gray eyes and the word interesting. Then he finished his review of the proofs, paid for his untouched ice cream, and went home to plan the next phase of the war he was starting. On a Thursday evening, while Harry was meeting with Elara and Neville to review the first week's circulation numbers, up 43% from pre-acquisition levels, a figure that made Griphook visibly pleased and Ragnok allegedly not displeased, which was apparently Goblin for ecstatic, the fireplace at Grimmauld Place roared green. Harry's wand was in his hand before the flames settled. Neville was half a second behind him, the two of them flanking the fireplace with a coordination that was becoming instinctive. The face that appeared in the flames was Remus Lupin's, and he looked scared. "Harry. Turn on the wireless. Now." Neville found the ancient radio on the mantelpiece, a relic of the Black family that somehow still worked, and tuned it to the wizarding wireless network. The announcer's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Repeat, the dark mark has been sighted over Fortnum Close in Ottery St. Catchpole. Ministry Aurors have been dispatched. Residents are advised to remain indoors. There are unconfirmed reports of casualties, Ottery St. Catchpole. The Weasleys." Harry moved before he thought. He was at the fireplace, reaching for flu powder, when Neville grabbed his arm. "Harry. Stop. The Burrow, the Weasleys are, and if you flew into the middle of a Death Eater attack, what happens? You die, the Prophet loses its owner, and everything we've built collapses." Harry rounded on Neville, and for one electric second, the room crackled with uncontrolled magic, the lights flickered, the radio squealed. Then Harry closed his eyes, breathed, and the pressure dropped. "Remus," he said to the fireplace. "What do you know?" The attack was on the village, not the Burrow specifically. 3 Death Eaters, hit and run, they burned 2 Muggle houses and killed a Muggle family. The Weasleys are safe. The order responded, but the attackers were gone before anyone arrived. Casualties? The Muggle family, a couple and their teenage daughter. The dark mark was left as a signature. Remus's voice was heavy. There are also reports coming in from Wales, a wizarding community near Carmarthen. Same pattern. Small force, fast attack, civilian targets. Elara, who had been listening in silence, spoke quietly. "They're sending a message." "What message?" Neville asked. "That they can strike anywhere, anytime, and the Ministry can't stop them." Elara's face was pale, but her voice was steady. "It's a terror campaign. Classic asymmetric warfare, you don't need to win battles, you just need to make people feel unsafe." The radio was still broadcasting, updates, speculation, the carefully modulated hysteria of a media that didn't know what to do with actual crisis because it had spent years ignoring the possibility. Harry listened and felt the familiar cold fury settling in his chest. This was why he was doing what he was doing. Not for revenge. Not for politics. Because people were dying while the institutions that were supposed to protect them were too busy protecting themselves. "Elara," he said. "I want a special edition tomorrow morning. Full coverage of both attacks, plus analysis. Talk to Bones at the DMLE, she'll want to get ahead of this. Get Rita on the Ministry response angle, how fast did they react, how many Aurors were dispatched, what went wrong. I'll need access to the attack sites. Take Colin Creevy. Photographs. Real ones, not the sanitized garbage the Ministry press office will release." Elara was already moving, grabbing her bag and her mirror. "I'll have copy to you by midnight. Neville, I need you to reach out to the DA. Mirror network, not owls. Find out who's safe, who's scared, and who's ready to start training again." Neville nodded. No argument, no hesitation. He pulled out the enchanted galleon that Harry had repurposed from the DA days and pressed his thumb to it. Harry turned back to Remus. "The order, what's Dumbledore doing?" "Convening an emergency meeting. He wants you there. Tell him I'm busy." "Harry, I'm not being petulant, Remus. I'm being strategic. If I show up at an order meeting right now, Dumbledore will use the crisis to pull me back into his circle. He'll be kind and wise and reassuring, and by the end of the night, I'll have agreed to something I don't want to agree to. I can't afford that. Remus was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. You sound like Sirius, he said finally. When Sirius was at his most clear-headed, not angry, not reckless, just focused, he sounded exactly like you do right now. Harry didn't trust himself to respond to that. Be careful, Remus said. Both of you. The flames died. Harry stood in the dim room and listened to Neville murmuring into his galleon, contacting Luna, then the Patils, then Dean Thomas, the old network coming alive. Elara's mirror was already active on the table, Rita Skeeter's acid tones coming through it as she received her assignment. The machine was running. The people were in place. And the Dark Lord was killing civilians while the wizarding world argued about who was in charge. Harry sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out parchment, and wrote a short letter. Daphne, I've thought about your offer. Can you meet me at Grimmauld Place tomorrow evening? Neville will give you the address. You said you could tell me when I'm being an idiot. I suspect I'm about to need that more than ever. HP. He sent it with Hedwig and watched her fly into the dark sky. Then he turned back to the work. Across the country, in a chamber that existed in no wizard's map, the Dark Lord sat in a high-backed chair and listened to his spy. The Prophet has been acquired by a goblin holding company, Severus Snape said. His voice carried the particular flatness he reserved for reporting information he considered beneath his attention. The identity of the true owner remains unknown. Dumbledore has been attempting to determine it. He has failed. Voldemort's red eyes gleamed in the firelight. His fingers, long, white, inhuman, steepled beneath his chin. And you believe this is significant? I believe it is anomalous. The Prophet has been a tool of the Ministry for decades. Whoever purchased it did so through channels designed to prevent identification, which suggests they intend to use it against established power structures. Against us? Against everyone. The new editorial direction has been aggressively independent. They published pieces critical of Umbridge, a Ministry creature. They've been probing the DMLE's war readiness. And there are rumors of an upcoming series about Dumbledore. Voldemort was silent for a moment. The chamber around him was dark and cold, a place that had been designed for intimidation, every shadow carefully positioned, every sound strategically dampened. The Death Eaters who attended him here always seemed smaller than they were. Snape, to his credit, did not seem diminished. He stood before his master with the rigid composure of a man who had long since accepted that his life was a performance conducted on a stage he could never leave. A newspaper. Voldemort's tone was dismissive. Words on parchment. They cannot stop curses. They cannot raise the dead. Let the sheep bleat, it changes nothing. With respect, my lord, public opinion shapes ministry policy, and ministry policy determines resource allocation for the war effort. If the Prophet successfully undermines confidence in the ministry's leadership, or in Dumbledore's, it could fracture the opposition before you need to break it yourself. Then it serves our purposes. For now. But whoever controls it will eventually turn their attention to us. An independent press is an enemy of all power, not merely the power it dislikes. Voldemort considered this. Then he waved a pale hand, a gesture of dismissal that was as absolute as a door slamming shut. Monitor it. When they become a nuisance, we will deal with them as we deal with all nuisances. Snape bowed and withdrew. As he walked through the corridor that led back to the apparition point, he permitted himself a single, brief expression of worry, the only honest emotion he'd shown in months. The Dark Lord was underestimating the Prophet. That was useful. But Snape had a suspicion about who owned Obsidian Press, and if he was right, the Dark Lord's dismissal was going to prove catastrophic. He knew only one person reckless enough, rich enough, and angry enough to buy a newspaper and declare war on Albus Dumbledore. The same person whose mind he had been ordered to violate for a year. The same person whose mother's eyes he could never quite stop seeing. Potter. You magnificent fool. What are you doing? Snape didn't share his suspicion with anyone. Not with Voldemort. Not with Dumbledore. He filed it away in the deepest, most heavily occluded chamber of his mind, behind walls of grief and memory that not even the Dark Lord could penetrate, and he waited. Snape was very good at waiting. It was the only skill that had kept him alive this long. The Prophet's second week was a knife fight. Harry barely slept. The special edition on the Death Eater attack sold out in 2 hours. They had to run a second printing, something the Prophet hadn't done in 15 years. Rita's piece on the Ministry response was surgical. She'd obtained response time data from a source inside the Auror office. Harry suspected Tonks, though he didn't ask, showing that it took the Ministry 47 minutes to respond to the Ottery St. Catchpole attack. 47 minutes. A Muggle family had died in the first 3. Ilara's editorial asked a single question: if the Ministry cannot protect its citizens, who can? The Ministry's answer came in the form of a visit from Rufus Scrimgeour himself, who showed up at the Prophet's offices on a Wednesday morning with 2 Aurors and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ilara handled it. She'd sent Harry a mirror report that evening, her voice clipped with barely suppressed fury. He wanted to discuss cooperation between the press and the government in wartime. Which is political code for stop publishing things that make me look bad. I told him the Prophet's editorial policy was set by the editor, not the minister. He suggested that certain privileges, our flow access, our OWL network license, our printing permits, could be reviewed if we continued to publish material that endangered national security. He threatened you. He implied. Politicians don't threaten, they suggest, and then they're surprised when the suggestion is reported verbatim on the front page. A pause. I'm running it tomorrow. Minister threatens press freedom, Prophet refuses to comply. Rita's writing it. She's been wanting to take a shot at Scrimgeour since he took office. Do it. The piece ran. Scrimgeour backed off, publicly, at least. Privately, Harry knew through Griphook, the Ministry had made 3 separate attempts to subpoena Obsidian Press's financial records. The goblins blocked each one with a wall of banking law so impenetrable that the Ministry's legal department reportedly gave up and went to the pub. The Prophet was holding. The wall was holding. But the pressure was building. And on the horizon, like a storm that hadn't broken yet, the Dumbledore series waited. Rita and Ilara had been working on it for days, assembling the documents, verifying the sources, building the narrative. The first installment would cover Dumbledore's early life, his friendship with Grindelwald, the letters, the shared ideology of wizard supremacy that the young Dumbledore had enthusiastically endorsed. It was historical, factual, and devastating, not because it revealed a monster, but because it revealed a man. A brilliant, ambitious young man who had once believed that wizards had the right and the duty to rule over Muggles, for their own good. The same phrase, for the greater good, that Grindelwald had carved above the gates of Nurmengard. Harry read the final draft at midnight, alone in the study at Grimmauld Place, with Creature hovering nearby in a state of confused loyalty. The piece was good. Better than good. It was the kind of journalism that could change the world, or burn it down. Ilara had framed it with devastating restraint, no accusations, no editorializing, just documents, dates, and Dumbledore's own words. The letters were reproduced in full. The historical context was provided. The reader was trusted to draw their own conclusions. Harry approved it. Then he sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what would happen when it hit the newsstands, and whether the world he was about to crack open could survive the breaking. He thought about Daphne Greengrass, who was coming to Grimmauld Place tomorrow, and who might be the ally he needed or the complication he couldn't afford. He thought about Dumbledore, who was probably sitting in his tower at that very moment, unaware that the beginning of the end was rolling off the presses. He thought about Voldemort, who was killing people while the light side argued about newspapers. And he thought about Sirius, who had started all of this with a chest full of truth and a note that said you deserved better. The printing press at the Prophet was running. Harry could feel it, almost, a vibration in the air, a pulse in the magic, the hum of truth being set in type and pressed into parchment. In a few hours, the first copies would be loaded onto owls and sent across the country. By breakfast, everything would change. Harry closed his eyes. He didn't sleep, he hadn't slept properly in weeks, but he rested, letting his mind settle, letting the pieces of his plan arrange themselves in the darkness behind his eyelids. Tomorrow, the world would learn that Albus Dumbledore was not the man they thought he was. And the day after that, Harry would have to deal with the consequences. But tonight, in the silence of the old house, with the portrait of Walburga Black muffled behind her curtains and the ghost of his godfather in every shadow, Harry allowed himself one moment of something that felt almost like peace. He was fighting. Not with a wand, or not only with a wand. With words, with truth, with the stubborn, reckless belief that people deserved to know the world they lived in. It wasn't enough. It might never be enough. But it was a start. Chapter 3, Above the Fold. The owl storm began at dawn. Harry stood at the window of Grimmauld Place's second-floor study and watched them come, dozens of owls, then hundreds, pouring across the London skyline like a dark, feathered tide. They weren't coming to him. They were going to the Prophet's offices, to the Ministry, to Hogwarts, to every corner of Wizarding Britain where someone had read the morning paper and felt the ground shift beneath their feet. The first installment of The Architect, Albus Dumbledore and the Philosophy of the Greater Good had hit newsstands 40 minutes ago. By the time Harry finished his tea, it was the only thing anyone was talking about. The enchanted mirror on the desk buzzed. Harry tapped it. Elara's face appeared, flushed and bright-eyed. Behind her, the Prophet newsroom was visible in a state of controlled pandemonium, people rushing between desks, owls swooping through the rafters, the massive printing press at the back of the room grinding out a second run. "We sold out," she said. "First time in the paper's history that the morning edition sold out before 8 o'clock. I've authorized a third printing. Our owl service is completely overwhelmed, I've had to contract emergency birds from Elops." Reactions? Split down the middle, exactly as we predicted. Half the letters are thanking us for telling the truth. The other half are calling us traitors, liars, and, she glanced at a parchment, enemies of the light who should be fed to dementors. That one's from Daedalus Diggle, if you can believe it. And from Hogwarts? Nothing official. But Marcus Belby has a contact in the castle staff. He says Dumbledore read the article at breakfast, folded the paper, set it beside his plate, and continued eating his porridge. Didn't say a word. That was worse than anger. Anger meant reaction, and reaction meant miscalculation. Silence meant Dumbledore was thinking. A thinking Dumbledore was the most dangerous thing in Wizarding Britain. What about the Ministry? Scrimgeour's office issued a statement saying the minister has no comment on historical matters unrelated to the current security situation. Translation: he's thrilled. Anything that weakens Dumbledore strengthens the Ministry's hand. Until we go after the Ministry. Elara's smile was thin and sharp. He'll figure that out eventually. By then, it'll be too late. She shuffled papers. Rita's already working on installment 2, the Ariana Dumbledore incident. The duel with Grindelwald and Aberforth. The sister's death. Harry's gut tightened. This was the piece that worried him most, not because of the information itself, but because Ariana Dumbledore had been an innocent victim, a girl caught in the crossfire of her brother's ambition. Publishing the story of her death risked looking cruel rather than journalistic. "Tell Rita to handle it with respect," Harry said. Ariana wasn't a villain. She was a casualty. If the piece reads like we're using a dead girl to score points, we'll lose every ounce of credibility we've built. Already told her. She pushed back. I pushed harder. Elara paused. "Harry, are you ready for what comes next? Because installment 1 was history. Installment 2 is tragedy. And installment 3 is the prophecy. The prophecy, the Potter's will, the Dursley placement. That's when it gets personal. For you and for Dumbledore. I know. Once we publish that, there's no going back. You know that too. I've known that since I opened the chest. Elara studied him through the mirror. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to satisfy her, or at least reassure her that he wasn't going to crack. I'll have installment 2 ready for review by Thursday. We run it Saturday. The mirror went dark. Harry sat down at the desk and pulled out the stack of letters that had arrived that morning, his own post, separate from the prophet's deluge. He'd sorted them into 3 piles before he'd even started the day: allies, enemies, and unknowns. The first letter in the ally pile was from Neville. Harry, Gran read the article. She cried. I've never seen her cry. She said she always suspected something was wrong with the way Dumbledore operated, but she never had the courage to say it out loud because he was the only one fighting you-know-who. She wants to meet you. She says she has information about what happened during the First War, things she overheard as a member of the Wizengamot. Things that might be useful. I'll bring her to Grimmauld Place whenever you say. Harry set it aside and picked up the next one. The handwriting was unfamiliar, cramped, precise, almost mechanical. Mr. Potter, I am Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I am writing in a personal capacity, not an official one. The article published today raises questions that I have been asking privately for years. I will not comment on their accuracy in writing. I am not so naive as to commit my thoughts to parchment in the current political climate. But I would welcome a conversation, in person, at a location of your choosing. I believe we may share certain concerns about the state of wizarding governance. I also believe that the current trajectory of public discourse, while uncomfortable, may be necessary. This letter will self-immolate 30 seconds after you finish reading it. I trust you understand why. A.B. The parchment burst into clean blue flame and vanished. Harry stared at the empty space where it had been and felt something he hadn't expected: hope. Amelia Bones was the most powerful law enforcement official in Britain, and she'd just reached out to him. Not to threaten, not to warn, to talk. The enemy pile was larger. 3 howlers, which he deactivated with a charm Tonks had taught him before they could shriek, a formal letter from the Board of Governors of Hogwarts demanding a retraction, unsigned, which meant the board was split, and a short, venomous note from Lucius Malfoy's solicitor threatening legal action for defamation of a public figure, on Dumbledore's behalf. Harry almost laughed at that one. Malfoy, defending Dumbledore. The Death Eater's strategy was transparent: if he could get a court injunction against the Prophet, it would stop not just the Dumbledore series but everything else. Harry sent the solicitor's letter to Griphook, who responded within the hour with a 3-page rebuttal citing goblin, wizarding, and international magical law that essentially told Malfoy to go jump in the lake. In more polite terms, obviously. Goblins were always polite when they were destroying you. The unknown pile contained 1 letter. He'd saved it for last because the handwriting was Hermione's. He opened it. Read it. Read it again. Then he put it down and closed his eyes. Daphne arrived at Grimmauld Place at 7 that evening, exactly on time. She'd been given the address by Neville, who'd written it on a slip of parchment that she'd memorized and then burned, because Daphne Greengrass understood operational security in a way that made Harry slightly envious. She stood in the entrance hall, looking up at the peeling wallpaper, the troll-leg umbrella stand, and the moth-eaten curtains that concealed the portrait of Walburga Black, and her expression was one of controlled assessment. "Charming," she said. "It grows on you. Like fungus, I imagine." Creature appeared at the end of the hall, eyes narrowing at the visitor. His feelings about guests at Grimmauld Place remained complicated. He tolerated Neville, who was polite to him, endured Elara, who ignored him, and despised everyone else on general principle. "Creature," Harry said, "this is Daphne Greengrass. She's a guest." The elf's eyes swept over Daphne with the practiced evaluation of a creature who'd spent decades serving blood purists. Whatever he saw, the pure blood bearing, the quality of her robes, the silver serpent brooch, seemed to pass inspection. Miss Greengrass. Creature will prepare tea. He shuffled away, muttering something that was either hospitality or contempt. He's pleasant, Daphne said. He tried to get me killed last year. We're working through it. Daphne looked at him, decided he wasn't joking, and filed the information away without comment. Harry led her to the study, the room he'd been using as his base of operations, the walls now covered with notes, maps, and the web of connections he was building between the Prophet, his allies, and the political landscape of Wizarding Britain. She took it in with a single sweeping glance. Then she sat in the armchair by the fire, crossed her legs, and looked at him. So, she said. You own the Daily Prophet, you're dismantling Albus Dumbledore's public image, and you're doing it while the Dark Lord builds an army. I have questions. I'd be worried if you didn't. First question, what's the endgame? You're tearing down the current power structure, but you haven't said what you want to build in its place. Revolution without a plan is just vandalism. Harry sat across from her. This was the question he'd been wrestling with for weeks, the one that kept him up at night, the one that Alara had been pushing him on, the one that Neville hadn't asked because Neville trusted Harry to figure it out. Accountability, he said. Not revolution. I don't want to replace Dumbledore, I want to make it so that no one person can do what he's done. The wizarding world runs on personality cults, Dumbledore, Voldemort, Fudge, Scrimgeour. Individual wizards accumulating power without checks, without transparency, without anyone watching. The Prophet is the check. An independent press that reports truth and holds power accountable, no matter who holds it. That's a principle, not a plan. Fine. The plan, we use the Prophet to build public pressure for institutional reform. Independent judiciary, right now the Wisingamot is legislature, court, and police oversight rolled into one, which is insane. DMLE accountability, no more Aurors operating without warrants. Creature rights, the goblins, the werewolves, the house elves, all the beings that Wizarding Britain treats as second-class citizens while depending on them for everything. And transparency in the Order of the Phoenix, if Dumbledore is going to run a private army, the public should know about it. Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then, you've thought about this more than I expected. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. I reserve compliments for when they're earned. She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward. Your plan has a problem. Several problems, actually, but one that matters more than the rest. Tell me. You're fighting a three-front war. Dumbledore, the Ministry, and Voldemort. You can fight one. Maybe two. 3 is suicide. She held up a finger. Dumbledore has the Order, the school, and a century of accumulated goodwill. Even with the exposés, a significant portion of the public will side with him because they're afraid and he represents safety. A second finger. The Ministry has the Aurors, the Wisingamot, and the legal authority to shut you down if they can find the right lever. Scrimgeour is tolerating you because you're hurting his rival, but the moment you turn on him, that tolerance evaporates. A third finger. Voldemort has an army that's growing every day, and every blow you strike against Dumbledore and the Ministry weakens the only forces standing between him and total domination. Harry had known all of this. Hearing it laid out with Daphne's clinical precision still felt like a punch in the stomach. So what do you suggest? Prioritize. Voldemort is the existential threat. Dumbledore is the institutional threat. The Ministry is the political threat. You can't fight all three at once, so you need to sequence. She met his eyes. Hit Dumbledore now, hard and fast, while the public is receptive. Then pivot to alliance building. Find common ground with the Ministry through Bones. Find common ground with the Order through the members who are sympathetic. Build a coalition that can fight Voldemort without being controlled by any single person. A pause. Including you. Including me. Especially you. If you become the new Dumbledore, the benevolent dictator who makes all the decisions because he's sure he's right, then everything you're doing is pointless. You've just replaced one tyrant with another. The word tyrant hung in the air between them. It was harsh. It was also fair. I'm 16, Harry said. Nobody's going to call me a tyrant. Voldemort started at 16. Dumbledore started younger. Age isn't armor against arrogance. Daphne's voice was even, but her eyes were intense. I'm not saying you're like them. I'm saying the road you're on leads to the same destination if you're not careful. The fire crackled. The house creaked around them, old wood, old magic, old ghosts. Is this the part where you tell me I'm being an idiot? Harry asked. Not yet. You're being reckless, which is different. Idiots don't question themselves. You clearly do. I question myself constantly. It's exhausting. The corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Good. Keep doing it. Creature appeared with tea, a proper service, silver tray, porcelain cups, the works. He set it on the side table with the exaggerated formality of an elf who was performing under judgment and poured for Daphne first, then Harry. The tea was perfect, strong, hot, with just a hint of bergamot. Daphne sipped and raised an eyebrow. Your elf makes excellent tea. Creature is the most skilled elf in Britain, Harry said. He's also the most difficult, but the two things might be related. Creature made a sound that could have been a scoff or a pleased grunt and vanished. They worked for 3 hours. Daphne laid out the Wizengamot like a battlefield, mapping families, alliances, voting blocks. The old blood supremacists, Malfoy, Nott, Crabbe, Goyle, were lost causes. The progressive bloc, Longbottom, Bones, Abbott, Macmillan, was already sympathetic. The key was the middle, the neutral families who voted based on self-interest rather than ideology. The Greengrasses. The Devises. The Zabinas. The Ogdens. Nearly 30 votes that could swing either way depending on how the wind blew. My father controls 6 of those votes directly through client relationships, Daphne said, marking them on the parchment. Another 8 follow his lead because he's been the neutral bloc's unofficial coordinator for 20 years. If I can bring him around, can you? Maybe. He's pragmatic. If he sees the new prophet as a winning horse, he'll back it. If he sees it as a losing cause, he'll stay neutral and wait for the dust to settle. She set down her quill. He'll want to meet you. Not as Harry Potter the boy who lived, he doesn't care about that. As Harry Potter the political operator. He'll test you. I've been tested by worse. You've been tested by dark lords and dragons. My father is more dangerous. He'll be polite while he eviscerates you. You get that from him, then. Daphne looked at him sharply. Then, for the first time since he'd known her, she laughed. It was short, surprised, and real, and it changed her face entirely. The careful mask dropped for a second, and underneath was someone younger, warmer, and more tired than she let the world see. Maybe, she admitted. Don't tell him I said that. The evening wound down. Neville arrived around 9 with food from the leaky cauldron and joined them for the last hour, reviewing the Wizengamot map and adding his own knowledge of the old families. Gran had been educating him in politics since the summer started, and he was a faster learner than anyone, including himself, had expected. When Daphne left, stepping into the fireplace with a handful of Flo powder, she paused and looked back at Harry. The piece on Ariana Dumbledore, she said. I read it in the proofs you showed me. And? It's good. It's honest. It's going to break people's hearts. She met his eyes. Make sure you're ready for what happens when it does. Some of those hearts will be people you care about. She dropped the powder, spoke her destination, and vanished in green flame. Harry stared at the empty fireplace and thought about Hermione's letter. He'd been putting off rereading it. He wasn't sure why, or rather, he was sure, and the reason was cowardice, and admitting to cowardice annoyed him enough that he pulled the letter out and opened it again. Harry, I don't know how to write this letter. I've started it 4 times and thrown away 3 drafts because each one sounded either too angry or too reasonable, and I'm both. I read The Prophet this morning. The Dumbledore article. I know it's you, don't insult my intelligence by denying it. Nobody else has the resources, the motive, and the particular brand of righteous stubbornness necessary to do something this reckless. Here's what I need you to understand, I'm not saying the information is wrong. I've done my own research since you told us about the prophecy. Yes, Harry, I know how to use a library, you don't need to look so surprised, and some of what the article says aligns with things I've found. Dumbledore's friendship with Grindelwald is historical record. The letters exist. The ideology he espoused as a young man is troubling. But Harry, context matters. He was 18 years old. He was grieving his mother's death, caring for a sick sister, angry at a world that had hurt his family. He made terrible choices, and then he spent the rest of his life trying to atone for them. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it, and the difference between those two things matters. What worries me isn't the truth. It's the timing. We are at war, Harry. Voldemort is killing people. The Ministry is barely functional. Dumbledore, whatever his flaws, is the only person Voldemort fears. If you destroy his credibility now, if you tear down the one leader the light side has, what replaces him? You. You're 16 years old and you're running a newspaper from a haunted house. I'm not your enemy. I'm your friend. And as your friend, I'm asking you to think about what you're doing. Really think. Not with your anger. With your brain. Please talk to me before you do something that can't be undone. Love, Hermione. Harry put the letter down. His jaw ached, he'd been clenching it without realizing. She wasn't wrong. That was the problem. She wasn't wrong about the timing, or the risk, or the fact that tearing down Dumbledore in the middle of a war was like pulling the foundation stones out of a building while people were still living in it. But she wasn't right either. Not entirely. Because the foundation was already rotten, and the people living in the building didn't know it, and the man who'd built it was so convinced of his own righteousness that he'd sacrifice children on the altar of his architecture without losing a minute of sleep. Harry picked up his quill. He wrote a reply. It was shorter than Hermione's letter, he didn't have her gift for argument, but it was honest. Hermione, you're right about some of it. You're wrong about some of it. I'm not going to argue with you by owl, we've done enough of that to last a lifetime. I'll tell you everything. All of it, things I haven't published, things that will change how you see this. But I need you to come to Grimmauld Place and hear it in person. Bring Ron if he'll come. You asked me to think with my brain instead of my anger. I have. The anger is still there, it might always be there, but this isn't about anger anymore. This is about the fact that people deserve to know the truth about the people who hold power over them, even when the truth is painful. Especially when the truth is painful. You said context matters. You're right. Come hear the full context. Then decide. I love you too, even when you're yelling at me on parchment. Harry. He sent it. Then he went to bed and didn't sleep, because the next morning the second installment was publishing, and sleep felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Installment 2, The Story of Ariana Dumbledore, landed like a depth charge in still water. Rita had, against all expectations, written it with restraint. The piece told the story simply, a young girl attacked by muggle boys who saw her doing magic, traumatized into instability, hidden away by her family. A mother killed by one of Ariana's uncontrolled outbursts. 2 brothers and a brilliant friend, arguing about power and destiny, and the girl trapped in the middle. A duel, 3-sided, chaotic, fueled by ideology and rage. And at the end, a dead girl and a family shattered into pieces that never came back together. The piece didn't accuse Dumbledore of killing Ariana. It simply laid out the facts. There was a three-way duel between Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald. Ariana was caught in the crossfire. No one knew whose spell killed her. Albus had lived with that uncertainty for over a century. It was, as Daphne had predicted, heartbreaking. And the public response was not what Harry expected. Instead of the partisan fury that had greeted Installment 1, the clean split between supporters and opponents, Installment 2 produced something more complicated. People felt sorry for Dumbledore. They saw a young man crushed by guilt, driven by the need to atone, spending his entire life trying to be good enough to deserve the forgiveness he couldn't give himself. Letters to the prophet ran 2-to-1 sympathetic. Editorials in competing publications, The Quibbler, which weekly, a small quarterly called the Magical Review, questioned whether the prophet was going too far. Elara brought Harry the numbers at their evening meeting, her expression troubled. "We overplayed it," Harry said, reading the reaction summaries. "We didn't overplay anything. We told the truth." Elara set down her tea. "But the truth isn't always a weapon, Harry. Sometimes it's a mirror, and people see something in it they don't want to attack. They see themselves. Everyone's lost someone. Everyone's done something they regret. Dumbledore's story about Ariana makes him human, and humans get sympathy. So what do we do?" Harry stared at the wall map. The web of connections, the names and alliances and pressure points. Daphne's Wisengamot breakdown. Neville's DA network. The Goblin financial infrastructure. All the pieces he'd assembled, and now the narrative was slipping sideways. "We don't fight the sympathy," he said slowly. "We use it." "How?" Installment 3. The prophecy. The Potter's will. The Dursleys. He turned to Elara. "We frame it as a pattern. Not, Dumbledore is evil, we've never said that, and we shouldn't start. The frame is, Dumbledore experienced terrible tragedy as a young man, and that tragedy shaped him into someone who believes he alone can make the hard choices. He carries the guilt of Ariana's death, so he tries to control everything, to make sure no one else has to bear what he's borne. And in trying to protect the world from pain, he causes more of it. Not because he's a monster, because he's a man who can't let go." Elara was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, something like admiration, tempered with wariness. "That's, actually brilliant. You want to make Dumbledore sympathetic and terrifying at the same time. I want to make him real. People don't fear monsters, they fear the neighbor who thinks he's right. The coworker who cuts corners because he's sure no one will get hurt. The leader who decides the ends justify the means because he's too arrogant to consider that he might be wrong. And you think that's more damaging than calling him a villain? I think it's more honest. And I think honesty is the one thing he can't defend against." Elara picked up her quill and started writing. "I'll rework the framing for Installment 3. We can have it ready by next Wednesday." She paused. "Harry, when we publish the prophecy, people are going to realize you're the subject. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Your anonymity as the prophet's owner won't last much longer after that. I know. You might want to think about going public before someone outs you. Control the narrative." "I'll think about it." He thought about it for the rest of the night. And the next morning, when he woke from 2 hours of fitful sleep to find 3 more letters waiting for him, the thinking got harder. Ron's letter arrived with Pig, who was vibrating with the manic energy of an owl who'd been given an important mission and was determined to prove himself worthy. "Harry, Hermione's been in a state since the Dumbledore articles. She thinks you're behind them. I told her she was mental. Then I thought about it for a bit and realized she's probably right, because this is exactly the sort of mad thing you'd do. Look, mate. I don't understand half of what's going on. The political stuff, the newspaper stuff, the goblin stuff, it's over my head. But I know you, and I know you wouldn't do this if you didn't have a good reason. Mum's furious. She's been writing letters to the prophet demanding a retraction. Dad's been quiet, which is worse. He goes quiet when he's thinking, and Dad thinking means something's really wrong. I want to come see you. Hermione says you invited us to Grimmauld Place. I'll be there. Just, tell me the truth, yeah. All of it. I can handle it. Ron P.S. Fred and George say to tell you they're in, whatever it is. They said you'd know what that means. Harry smiled. It was small and tired, but real. Ron might not understand the strategy, but he understood loyalty, his own particular kind of loyalty, fierce and simple and unshakable once committed. And the twins. Harry had been planning to contact them. Their shop in Diagon Alley was perfectly positioned as an intelligence hub, and their ability to create communication devices, concealment tools, and general chaos was invaluable. The second letter was from Augusta Longbottom. Mr. Potter, my grandson tells me you are engaged in an undertaking of considerable ambition and significance. He also tells me that you possess evidence pertaining to Albus Dumbledore's conduct during the First Wizarding War, evidence that may explain certain decisions that resulted in the permanent incapacitation of my son and daughter-in-law. I have served on the Wizengamot for 43 years. I have kept my peace about many things because I believe that the defeat of the Dark Lord required unity, and unity required silence. I am no longer willing to be silent. I will come to Grimmauld Place at your earliest convenience. I will bring documents from the Longbottom family archives that I believe will be of interest. Yours, Augusta Longbottom. Harry set that letter aside with the care it deserved. Augusta Longbottom on his side was worth 10 Wizengamot votes and a century of institutional credibility. The third letter had no signature. It was written in a hand Harry didn't recognize, on plain parchment, with no seal or identifying mark. Potter, you are making enemies you cannot afford. The Dark Lord considers the prophet beneath his notice. Do not give him reason to reconsider. Destroy this letter. Harry stared at it. The handwriting was angular, precise, controlled. The warning was specific enough to be useful and vague enough to be deniable. There was only one person Harry could think of who would risk sending an unsigned warning to Harry Potter while serving Lord Voldemort. Snape. Harry destroyed the letter as instructed. Then he sat very still for a long time, turning over the implications. Snape knew. Or suspected. And instead of reporting to Voldemort, he'd warned Harry. Which meant either Snape's loyalty to Dumbledore was genuine enough that he'd protect Harry even while Harry was tearing Dumbledore apart, or Snape was playing his own game entirely, a game that served neither master and both at once. Harry filed it away. Snape was a variable he couldn't control and couldn't afford to ignore. The confrontation came on a Tuesday. Harry was in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, reviewing the final draft of Installment 3 with Neville. The piece was ready. The prophecy, the Potter's will, the deliberate placement with the Dursleys over every legal objection. Ilara's framing was exactly what Harry had proposed, not an accusation, but a portrait. A man so haunted by past failure that he'd convinced himself only total control could prevent future tragedy. The kitchen door opened without a knock. Albus Dumbledore stood in the doorway. He was not smiling. He was not twinkling. He looked old, genuinely old, in a way that had nothing to do with his years and everything to do with the weight he was carrying. His right hand was blackened and dead-looking, tucked partially into his sleeve. Harry had noticed it at the will reading but hadn't asked about it. Now, in the harsh light of the kitchen, it looked worse, the skin charred, the fingers slightly curled, as though the hand had been burned from the inside out. Harry. His voice was quiet. We need to talk. Neville stood, wand in his hand, face hard. Harry raised a hand to stop him. It's all right, Neville. It's not all right. He shouldn't be able to get in here. The Fidelius from the Order days still has residual access, Dumbledore said. I could have removed myself from it, but I wanted to leave the option open for emergencies. A pause. This qualifies. Harry looked at Neville. Give us a minute. Neville held Dumbledore's gaze for a long, charged moment. Whatever passed between them, the accumulated weight of a grandmother's grief, a childhood defined by tragedy, a war that had stolen 2 parents as surely as death, it communicated volumes. Then Neville pocketed his wand and walked out, closing the door behind him with a controlled click. Harry sat at the kitchen table. He didn't offer tea. He didn't gesture for Dumbledore to sit. The old man sat anyway, lowering himself into the chair opposite with the careful movements of someone whose body was failing him in ways he wasn't ready to acknowledge. They looked at each other across the table where Sirius had once sat, in the house where Sirius had been trapped, in the shadow of the death that had started all of this. You own the Daily Prophet, Dumbledore said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Through a goblin shell company called Obsidian Press, financed by the Black and Potter estates. Yes. And you are publishing a series of articles designed to dismantle my public standing, my institutional authority, and the framework of trust upon which the Order of the Phoenix, and by extension, the entire war effort against Voldemort, depends. I'm publishing the truth. What people do with it is up to them. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Not in agreement, in acknowledgement. The gesture of a man cataloging the dimensions of a problem. The truth. He said the word the way Ragnok had, testing it, weighing it. May I tell you what I see, Harry? Not what I think, or what I believe, but what I see when I look at what you've done. Go ahead. I see a young man in terrible pain. A young man who lost someone he loved, someone I failed to protect, and I carry that failure every day, and who has channeled that pain into action. I see cleverness, courage, and a strategic mind that would have made your mother proud and your father slightly nervous. The faintest ghost of a smile. And I see a boy who is so angry at me for lying to him that he's willing to risk the destruction of everything I've built, because he believes, perhaps rightly, that what I built was constructed on a foundation of deception. Harry said nothing. But I also see something you don't, Dumbledore continued. I see the consequences. Not the immediate consequences, the articles, the outrage, the political reshuffling, but the deeper ones. The ones that take months to manifest. The fracturing of alliances. The emboldening of the enemy. The slow erosion of the public's capacity to trust anyone or anything, because the one person they believed in has been revealed as fallible. That's their problem, not mine. People should know that their leaders are fallible. Should they? In wartime? Dumbledore leaned forward. Harry, I have spent my entire life studying the intersection of truth and power. I have watched civilizations fall, not because they lacked strength, but because they lost faith. When the people of a society stop believing in their institutions, they don't become free. They become vulnerable. To demagogues. To fear. To the darkest impulses of their nature. And your solution is to lie to them? To decide what they can and can't handle? My solution, Dumbledore's voice tightened for the first time. My solution was to bear the weight myself. To make the impossible choices so that others wouldn't have to. Was that arrogant? Yes. Was it wrong? Perhaps. But every choice I made, Harry, every single one, was made with the understanding that I might be condemning myself to save others. Including me. You condemned me. The kitchen went very still. Yes, Dumbledore said. The word fell like a stone into water. I did. You knew I was a Horcrux. You've known since I was 1 year old. You put me with the Dursleys, people who hated me, who starved me, who locked me in a cupboard, because you wanted me humble and self-sacrificing. Because a boy who'd been raised knowing he was special might not walk willingly to his death. Dumbledore's blue eyes were bright behind his spectacles. Not with the performative twinkle Harry had grown to despise. With something raw. Something that looked, terrifyingly, like pain. Would you have had me tell an 11-year-old boy, Dumbledore said quietly, that a fragment of the darkest wizard in history lies behind his eyes? Would that have been kinder? You could have told someone. My guardians, not the Dursleys, the real ones, the ones my parents chose. Sirius. Remus. They could have raised me knowing the truth. They could have trained me, prepared me, given me a life worth fighting for instead of a childhood worth escaping. And if they had? If Sirius had known, from the moment he held you as a baby, that you were marked for death, would he have been able to let you live? Truly live? Or would every moment have been shadowed by the knowledge of what was coming? Harry opened his mouth to respond and found, to his fury, that he didn't have an answer. Because Dumbledore was right, Sirius, knowing that Harry had to die, would have been destroyed by it. He would have spent every moment trying to find another way, and when he failed, it would have eaten him alive. But that didn't make it okay. It didn't make any of it okay. You used my parents, Harry said, and his voice was flat and hard in a way that made the magic in the room pulse. You suggested Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper. You knew my father would listen to you, because he trusted you, and you used that trust to maneuver them into a position where their deaths would serve your plan. That is not, Dumbledore stopped. Started again. I did not plan their deaths. I did not foresee Peter's betrayal. But you put them in a position where betrayal was possible. You could have been the secret keeper yourself, you're the most powerful wizard alive, nobody would have broken you. But you suggested Pettigrew, because if the Potters died, the Horcrux in my scar would be activated by the killing curse, and that gave you data. Information about how the Horcrux worked, how it connected me to Voldemort. Their deaths were useful to you. No. The word was sharp. Cracked. No, Harry, Dumbledore's composure broke. For a single, terrible moment, the greatest wizard of the age looked like what he was, a very old man who had been carrying an impossible burden for too long and was finally feeling it crush him. I loved your parents. Not as a strategist loves useful pieces. As a man loves his friends. Their deaths broke something in me that has never healed. Then why? Because the alternative was worse. Dumbledore's voice rose for the first and only time in the conversation. You were a Horcrux, Harry. A piece of the darkest wizard in history was embedded in your skull, and I had no way to remove it. I spent years, searching for an alternative, and I found none. The only way to destroy a Horcrux is to destroy the vessel. The only way to destroy the vessel and preserve the host is a willing sacrifice fueled by love. Your mother's sacrifice created the protection. Your sacrifice would end it. There was no other way. You didn't know that. You assumed. You decided, and then you arranged everything to fit your decision. Yes. Because someone had to decide. Someone had to look at the impossible situation and choose the least terrible option. And I chose you because, his voice cracked again. Because you were the one the prophecy chose, and I could not save everyone, Harry. I could only try to save the world. The kitchen was silent. The fire had died to embers. The old house groaned around them, its ancient bones settling in the way that old houses do when they're tired of holding themselves up. Harry looked at Albus Dumbledore, the man who had shaped his entire life, who had decided before Harry could walk that Harry would die, who had loved him and used him and lied to him and believed, with the unshakable conviction of a man who had defeated Grindelwald and survived a century of darkness, that he was right. And Harry felt something he hadn't expected. Not rage. Not hatred. Not even the cold, strategic anger that had driven him since June. Pity. It was a small, hot, uncomfortable thing, and it didn't absolve anything. Dumbledore was still wrong. What he'd done was still a violation, of trust, of consent, of the basic human right to know your own fate. But the man sitting across from Harry wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd been playing God for so long that he'd forgotten how to be human, and the forgetting had cost him everything. I'm not going to stop, Harry said. Dumbledore closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were dry and clear and very tired. I didn't expect you to. The next installment publishes on Wednesday. The prophecy. The will. The Dursleys. Everything. I see. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you because, Harry stopped. Why was he telling him? Courtesy. Cruelty. Some residual sense of obligation to the man who'd shaped his world, even if the shaping had been a lie. Because you should hear it from me first. Dumbledore sat very still for a long moment. Then he nodded, a small, definitive gesture that carried the weight of acceptance. May I ask one thing? You can ask. The pensive memory. Severus and I, the night your parents died. You have it. Yes. You haven't published it. Not yet. Why? Harry thought carefully about his answer. Because it's the most devastating piece of evidence I have, and I want to use it when it will have the most impact. Not to hurt you. To change things. Dumbledore studied him. Something shifted in his expression, a reordering, a reassessment. You are playing this very well, Harry. Better than I would have expected. Better, perhaps, than I would have played it. I had a good teacher. He just didn't know he was teaching me. The old man almost smiled. It was sad and real and human, and Harry had to look away from it. One more thing, Dumbledore said. He raised his blackened hand from his lap. The dead fingers caught the light, charred, brittle, ending just above the wrist in a line of angry scar tissue that pulsed with dark magic. I am dying, Harry. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into a well. This hand, I found one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. A ring, hidden in the Gaunt family home. When I destroyed it, the curse on the ring nearly killed me. Severus has slowed it, but the curse is spreading. I have, perhaps, a year. Harry stared at the hand. At the man. At the calm, matter-of-fact way Dumbledore had delivered a death sentence in the same conversation where Harry had been trying to destroy his legacy. How many Horcruxes? Harry asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. 7, I believe. The diary, destroyed. The ring, destroyed. The locket, the cup, the snake, an unknown object likely connected to Ravenclaw or Gryffindor, and me. And you. Dumbledore's gaze was steady. I intended to tell you all of this during our private lessons at Hogwarts. Slowly, carefully, in a way that would prepare you for what had to come. You have made that approach, no longer viable. No. I haven't. Harry leaned forward. You were going to prepare me for my death. I'm going to prepare myself for my survival. There's a difference. Dumbledore frowned. Harry, I have spent decades researching Horcrux removal. There is no method, in wizarding knowledge. What about goblin knowledge? What about magical traditions that predate Hogwarts? What about the thousands of years of magical practice that wizards have ignored because they were too arrogant to learn from lesser beings? Something flickered in Dumbledore's eyes. Surprise. And, Harry could hardly believe it, hope. You've been speaking to Ragnok. I've been listening to Ragnok. There's a difference. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. The fire was truly dead now, just grey ash and the faint smell of smoke. The kitchen was cold. I underestimated you, he said finally. I have been underestimating you for years, and that is my greatest failure. Not the lies, not the manipulation, though those were failures too. The greatest failure was looking at you and seeing a piece on a board instead of a person with the capacity to fight his own battles. Harry swallowed hard. He would not let this moment become a reconciliation. There was too much broken, too much betrayed. But he could acknowledge what Dumbledore had just said without pretending it fixed anything. You're right, Harry said. It was. Dumbledore stood. He swayed slightly, caught himself on the table, and straightened with the careful dignity of a man determined not to appear weak. You are weakening the only defense this world has, Harry. I pray you have something to replace it with. He walked to the door. When you are ready, when you have decided whether you can work with a dying man who has wronged you, I will be at Hogwarts. The information about the remaining Horcruxes is yours. I should have given it to you freely long ago. He left. The kitchen door closed softly behind him, no dramatic exit, no final pronouncement. Just an old man walking away from the wreckage of his life's work. Harry sat alone in the cold kitchen. The draft of Installment 3 was still on the table, the ink still drying. He put his head in his hands and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. The hollow behind his ribs, the one that Sirius's death had carved, ached with a ferocity that made his breath stutter. Not because Dumbledore had hurt him. Because Dumbledore was dying, and Harry couldn't find it in himself to feel nothing about that. Neville opened the door 10 minutes later. He took one look at Harry's face, sat down across from him, and said nothing. He just sat there, steady and present, until Harry lifted his head. He's dying, Harry said. I heard. These walls are thin. A year. Maybe less. Does it change anything? Harry thought about it. Really thought, the way Hermione had asked him to, with his brain and not his anger. It changes the timeline, he said. It doesn't change the truth. Neville nodded. Then we keep going. Yeah. Harry straightened. Pulled the draft toward him. Picked up his quill. We keep going. Installment 3 broke on a Wednesday morning, and the world did not just crack, it shattered and reformed into something new and sharp-edged and frightening. The prophecy, the will, and the boy who was left behind the piece laid out everything. The prophecy, its full text published for the first time, with an explanation of what it meant and who it concerned. The Potter's will, naming Sirius Black, the Longbottoms, and Minerva McGonagall as guardians, explicitly forbidding Petunia Dursley. Dumbledore's emergency filing with the Wizengamot, overriding the will. The Blood Ward justification and the reality of Harry's childhood with the Dursleys, not in graphic detail, but enough. Enough for people to understand that the boy who lived had spent 10 years sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs while the wizarding world celebrated his survival. The response dwarfed everything that had come before. The Wizengamot was forced into emergency session. Half the members wanted an investigation into the will override. The other half wanted to censure the prophet for publishing classified information. The prophecy had been held in the Department of Mysteries, which raised its own questions about how it had leaked. Amelia Bones, in a move that sent shockwaves through the ministry, stood up in the chamber and called for a full independent inquiry into Dumbledore's actions as Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, and Headmaster of Hogwarts. If even half of what has been published is accurate, Bones said, her voice carrying the cold authority of a woman who had spent 30 years enforcing the law, then we have allowed a single individual to operate above the law for decades, and we have done so out of comfort, not conviction. Scrimgeour tried to control the session. He failed. The prophet had not just shifted the narrative, it had detonated it. At Hogwarts, the response was equally seismic. McGonagall sent Harry a letter that was exactly 3 sentences long, Mr. Potter. I have read the article. I have things to tell you that I should have said years ago. I will be at Grimmauld Place on Friday. The Weasley family splintered. Molly, predictably, was apoplectic. She viewed the attacks on Dumbledore as an attack on the Order, on her family, on everything she'd sacrificed. Arthur was quiet, reading the articles with the careful attention of a man who'd worked in the ministry long enough to recognize institutional failure when he saw it. Bill, who'd been working with the goblins at Gringotts, sent a terse note through channels, I don't know who's behind this, but my goblin contacts are thrilled. That should tell you something. Percy, of all people, sent a letter to the prophet's tip line with information about ministry cover-ups during the Fudge era. Elara recognized the handwriting and brought it to Harry with raised eyebrows. Ron arrived at Grimmauld Place that afternoon, red-faced and windblown from a broomstick ride that Harry suspected had been more about escaping the Burrow than reaching London. "Mum's lost it," Ron said, dropping into a kitchen chair. "She's been screaming at the Prophet, screaming at Dad, screaming at the ghoul in the attic. Ginny told her to shut up and Mum hexed a teapot at her." He rubbed his face. "It's bad, Harry. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just tell me what the hell is going on." Harry told him everything. The chest. The journal. The letters. The memory. All of it, laid out on the kitchen table like evidence in a trial, which, in a way, it was. Ron listened. He didn't interrupt, which was unusual for Ron. He held each document as Harry handed it to him, read carefully, and set it down before taking the next. When Harry reached the pensive memory, the conversation he still hadn't published, the one where Dumbledore told Snape that Harry must die, Ron went very pale. He really said that? The boy must die. In those exact words. Ron was quiet for a long time. His freckles stood out starkly against his white skin. "You know what's funny," he said eventually. "Not funny. The other word. Ironic. I've spent 5 years being jealous of you. The fame, the money, the attention. And the whole time, you were," he stopped. Swallowed. "You were walking around with a death sentence and no one told you." "Ron, no, shut up, let me finish." Ron's voice was rough. "I was jealous of a kid in a cupboard who was being raised to die. That's so messed up that I don't even know where to start." He looked at Harry with eyes that were reddened and fierce. "What do you need me to do?" For the second time that summer, Harry felt the burn of tears behind his eyes and refused to let them fall. "I need you to talk to your dad. Quietly. The Prophet's going to need allies in the ministry, and Arthur has connections that I don't. Done. And I need you to be okay with the fact that I can't tell your mum yet." She'd go straight to Dumbledore. Pain crossed Ron's face, but he nodded. "I know. She would." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Hermione? Coming tomorrow. She's going to be, I know. No, I mean, she's going to be angry, and then she's going to be terrified, and then she's going to start making lists. You know how she gets." Harry almost laughed. "Yeah. I know." Ron reached across the table and gripped Harry's forearm. "You're not going to die, mate. I don't care what the prophecy says or what Dumbledore planned. We'll figure it out." Harry gripped back. "I know." He didn't know. But Ron's certainty was a rock to hold onto in a sea that was getting rougher by the hour. Hermione arrived the next morning with 2 trunks of books, a cross-reference timeline of Dumbledore's career that she'd assembled from library sources, and an expression of controlled fury that Harry recognized from 3rd year when she'd punched Draco Malfoy in the face. She walked into the kitchen, set the trunks down, and looked at Harry. "Show me everything," she said. He did. The journal, the letters, the documents, the pensive memory, which he'd arranged to show her in the viewing basin that Griphook had left at Grimmauld Place for exactly this purpose. Hermione emerged from the memory white-faced and shaking. She sat down at the table, poured herself a glass of water, and drank it in 3 swallows. "He's wrong," she said. "He has to be wrong. There must be another way to remove a Horcrux without destroying the host. The goblins think there might be." "The goblins," she stopped. Processed. Her eyes widened. "You've been talking to the goblins about ancient magical practices that might apply to Horcrux removal." "I've been talking to the goblins about a lot of things." Hermione's hands were trembling. She clasped them together on the table. "Harry, I owe you an apology." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do. My letter, I told you to think with your brain. I was patronizing and I was wrong. You've been thinking more clearly than anyone, and I was too busy defending Dumbledore's intentions to see what he'd actually done. Her voice caught. He was going to let you die. He planned it. He designed your entire life around it. Hermione, don't comfort me. I'm angry. I'm allowed to be angry. She pulled the nearest trunk toward her and opened it. I've been researching since I got your letter. Horcrux theory. Soul magic. The intersection of goblin and wizarding magical traditions. There's almost nothing in Hogwarts' library. Dumbledore removed most of it decades ago, which should have been a red flag, but the restricted section has some texts that reference pre-Hogwarts magical practices. She pulled out a book so old that its binding was crumbling. This is a 12th century treatise on soul anchoring by a witch named Helga Folly, possibly a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff. It describes a process she calls soul severing, the separation of a foreign magical entity from a living host using a combination of blood magic, metalcraft, and ritual purification. She opened the book to a marked page. The process is brutal, possibly lethal, and requires materials that only goblins can produce. Specifically, goblin-forged silver, which absorbs and neutralizes dark magical enchantments. Harry stared at her. How long have you had this? 3 days. I found it in a second-hand shop in Edinburgh. The seller had no idea what it was. She met his eyes. I was going to bring it to Dumbledore. Then I read your articles, and I realized that Dumbledore already knows about this. He has to. He's been headmaster for decades, and this book was in the Hogwarts library before he removed it. He knew there was a potential alternative, and he chose not to pursue it. The implication settled over the room like a cold fog. Maybe he didn't think it would work, Harry said, testing the words even as he said them. Playing devil's advocate, because someone had to. Maybe. Or maybe he didn't want it to work, because a living Harry Potter who is no longer a Horcrux is a variable he can't control. Hermione's jaw was set. I'm done making excuses for him. Tell me about the goblins. Harry told her about Ragnok, about the favor he owed, about the goblins' hint of an extraction ritual. Hermione listened with the intensity of someone assembling a puzzle, and by the time he finished, she had already started writing notes. I want to meet with them, she said. The goblins. Whoever has the most knowledge of their pre-wand magical traditions. If there's a ritual that can extract the Horcrux without killing you, I will find it. Griphook can arrange it. Good. She paused. Harry, the articles. The campaign against Dumbledore. You need to know that I still think the timing is dangerous. But I understand why you're doing it, and I won't try to stop you. Thank you. I'm not finished. I won't try to stop you, but I'm going to hold you to the same standard you're holding Dumbledore. If you start making decisions for other people without their consent, if you start deciding what's for the greater good, I will turn on you so fast your head will spin. I'd expect nothing less. She smiled. It was small and fierce and exactly what he needed. Good. Now, I have approximately 800 questions about your goblin financial structure, and I'm going to need access to the Prophet's editorial records. Where do I start? Talk to Elara. She'll love you. She'd better. I'm going to make her life very difficult. I believe you. Hermione reached across the table and hugged him. It was tight, fierce, and over quickly. Hermione was not a lingering hugger, but it communicated everything words couldn't. The trio was back. Changed, reshaped, running on a new axis, but back. 2 days after Hermione arrived, the human cost of Harry's crusade came crashing through the door. Elara's mirror buzzed at 6 in the morning. Harry answered it bleary-eyed, still in yesterday's clothes, having fallen asleep at the study desk over a stack of Wisengamot voting records. Elara's face was ashen. Behind her, the newsroom was silent, not busy silent, but shocked silent. The kind of silence that followed a blow. Thaddeus Griggs, she said. Retired Auror. Served 30 years, mostly during the First War. He was mentioned in yesterday's piece, the section about ministry response failures during the Pruitt murders. Harry's stomach dropped. What happened? He killed himself last night. Left a note. His wife found him this morning. The words hit Harry like a physical force. He sat down. The room tilted. The note said he'd carried the guilt of the Pruitt case for 15 years. He was the Auror who was supposed to be guarding Molly's brothers the night they were killed. He was called away on a false lead, sent to the wrong location by faulty intelligence. He always believed it was his fault. When the article named him as part of the response failure, stop. Elara stopped. Harry stared at the mirror. The face looking back at him was his own, reflected in the enchanted glass, pale and sick. He wasn't the story, Harry said. His voice sounded wrong. He was a footnote. One line in a piece about institutional failure. I know. We didn't accuse him of anything. The piece specifically said the false lead was the result of systemic intelligence failures, not individual negligence. I know, Harry. But he didn't read it that way. He read it as the world finally knowing what he'd been punishing himself for since 1981. Harry closed his eyes. Behind them, he saw the name in the article, just a name, just one line in a 1,000-word piece, a historical detail that had seemed important for completeness and now had a body attached to it. He hadn't known Thaddeus Griggs. He'd never met the man, never heard his name before reading Sirius's research notes. Griggs was a stranger, a retired Auror in a cottage in Dorset who'd spent 15 years drinking too much and sleeping too little and carrying a weight that Harry's newspaper had just made public. And now he was dead. What do we do? Harry asked. We report it. Factually, respectfully. We don't hide from it. Elara's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. If we bury this, we're no better than the prophet under the Selwyns. We made a choice. There are consequences. We face them. Write a piece. Not Rita, you. About Griggs himself. His career, his service, what he sacrificed. Let people see the man, not just the name. Harry paused. And reach out to his wife. Not for a quote, for condolences. From me personally. Elara nodded. I'll handle it. The mirror went dark. Harry sat in the study and felt the weight of what he'd done settle on his shoulders like a physical thing, heavy, immovable, his. He'd known this was possible. He'd known, in the abstract, that truth was a weapon and weapons had collateral damage. But the abstract was easy. The reality was a man in a cottage who'd read a newspaper and decided he couldn't carry the shame anymore. Neville found him there an hour later, still sitting, still staring at nothing. I heard, Neville said. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. I didn't know him. Doesn't matter. It should have been a footnote, Neville. Just context. Background detail. Maybe. Or maybe it was a wound that was always going to kill him, and the article was just the thing that finally broke the skin. Harry looked at him. I'm not saying it's not your fault, Neville said quietly. I'm saying it might not be only your fault. He was carrying that for 15 years. The system that failed the Pruitts failed him too, left him alone with the guilt, no support, no help. Your article didn't create the wound. It exposed it. Does that matter to his wife? No, Neville said honestly. It doesn't. They sat in silence for a while. Then Harry stood, washed his face, changed his clothes, and went back to work. Because the alternative was stopping, and stopping meant the truth stayed buried, and buried truth was what had killed Thaddeus Griggs in the first place. But he felt the weight. He'd feel it for a long time. Daphne came that evening. She'd heard about Griggs, it was already spreading through the wizarding grapevine, the story of the retired Auror who'd killed himself after being named in the Prophet. Anti-Prophet sentiment was spiking. The ministry was making sympathetic noises about the dangers of irresponsible journalism. Dumbledore's supporters were using the death as evidence that the exposés were doing more harm than good. Harry was in the kitchen when she arrived, staring at a cold cup of tea and trying to draft a response editorial that didn't sound offensive, callous, or false. Daphne sat down across from him, read what he'd written, and crossed out everything after the first sentence. "You're overthinking it. A man is dead because of something I published. A man is dead because he was left alone with guilt by the same institutions you're trying to reform. That's the story. Don't apologize for telling the truth, apologize for not telling it sooner. That's easy to say. It's easy to say because it's right. Hard to feel, though." She looked at him. "Are you okay?" "No." "Good answer. If you said yes, I'd know you were lying or sociopathic." She took the parchment from him and started writing. Her handwriting was precise, elegant, nothing like Harry's jagged scrawl. "Here. The prophet mourns the death of Thaddeus Griggs, a dedicated orar who served his community with honor. We take responsibility for our role in bringing to light the burdens he carried. We also ask, why was a man who served 30 years left alone with his guilt? Where were the institutions that should have supported him? Thaddeus Griggs deserved better from all of us, including us. Simple. Honest. It acknowledges the cost without retreating from the mission." Harry read it. It was better than anything he could have written. "You're good at this. I was raised by a political operator. Messaging is in my blood." She set down the quill. "Harry, this is going to happen again. Not necessarily a death, but consequences. People getting hurt. Relationships breaking. Every truth you publish is a stone thrown into water, and you can't control the ripples. You need to make peace with that or it'll eat you alive. I don't want to make peace with it. Making peace with it is what Dumbledore did. He made peace with sacrificing people and it turned him into." Harry stopped. The sentence hung between them, unfinished. Daphne finished it for him. "Into someone who sleeps at night while children live in cupboards." The kitchen was quiet. The fire crackled. Upstairs, the muffled sound of Hermione arguing with a book she disagreed with filtered through the ceiling. "Then don't make peace with it," Daphne said. "Carry it. Feel the weight every single time. That's what makes you different from him. Not your choices might turn out to be just as terrible as his. The difference is that you refuse to stop feeling the cost." Harry looked at her. In the firelight, her face was warm and serious and stripped of the carefully maintained neutrality she wore in public like armor. This was Daphne Greengrass without the mask, not softer, exactly, but more present. More real. "Are you doing this because it's right," she asked, "or because you're angry?" He thought about it. He thought about Sirius's note and Dumbledore's confession and Thaddeus Griggs's wife finding her husband's body. He thought about the pensive memory and the prophecy and the Horcrux behind his scar. He thought about the printing press running in the night, pushing truth into the world whether the world wanted it or not. "Both," he said. Daphne nodded. "Then keep going. But don't pretend it's only one." Their eyes held. Something passed between them, not romance, not yet, but the precursor to it. The recognition that happens when two people see each other clearly for the first time and don't look away. Harry broke the gaze first. Not because he wanted to, but because the moment was too raw and too real and he didn't have room for one more feeling on a day that had already been full of them. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. I didn't do anything. You told me the truth. That's enough." She picked up her quill and went back to the editorial draft, making small corrections with the practiced hand of someone who'd been editing her father's correspondence since she was 12. But the corner of her mouth was curved slightly upward, and she didn't suggest he make tea, which meant she was planning to stay. Harry didn't ask her to leave. He sat beside her at the table and they worked in comfortable, waited silence while the night deepened around the old house and the war built towards something none of them were ready for. The pensive memory remained unpublished. Harry carried the file in his pocket everywhere he went, a small, cool weight against his hip, a reminder of the weapon he hadn't fired. Daphne had been right. Firing it too early would panic people. The revelation that Harry Potter was a Horcrux, that a piece of Voldemort lived in the boy who lived, would cause a terror so deep and so primal that rational discourse would become impossible. People would look at Harry and see Voldemort. They would pull their children away from him. They would demand his imprisonment, his execution, his exile. The very sympathy and support that the earlier articles had built would collapse into fear. So Harry waited. And while he waited, the world kept turning, and the Dark Lord kept killing. It happened on a Saturday night in August. 3 attacks. Simultaneous. Coordinated with a precision that spoke of careful planning and ruthless intelligence. The first hit Ottery St. Catchpole, again. Not the borough this time, but the village itself. Death Eaters operated into the high street at 9:30 in the evening and began burning buildings. The Muggle pub. The post office. A cottage where a half-blood family named Fawcett lived. They survived because their 12-year-old daughter had set up warning wards she'd learned from a library book. The Death Eaters left the dark mark and vanished before the Aurors arrived. The second hit a wizarding community in Wales called Cwm Cadnant, a cluster of cottages in a valley where about 30 magical families lived. 4 Death Eaters. They were methodical. They burned every house, one by one, working their way up the valley. 7 people died, including 2 children. A teenage boy named Emrys Cadwallader fought back with a wand he wasn't technically licensed to carry and killed one of the attackers before being struck down. He survived. Barely. The third was the worst, because of what it meant. Godric's Hollow. Voldemort hadn't sent Death Eaters. He'd sent inferi, animated corpses, dozens of them, dragging themselves through the streets of the village where Harry's parents had lived and died. They didn't kill anyone, there was almost nobody left in Godric's Hollow to kill, most residents having fled after Voldemort's return became public knowledge. But they defiled. They smashed windows, clawed at doors, tore up the memorial garden that the wizarding community had built around the ruins of the Potter cottage. And on the wall of the Godric's Hollow church, scorched into the stone by dark magic, they left a message, "The dead are mine." Harry heard about it from the wireless first, then from Alara's mirror, then from a flood of messages through the DA's enchanted galleons. He stood in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place with Neville, Hermione, and Ron, listening to the casualty reports come in, and felt the ground shift beneath his feet. 14 dead. 9 in Cwm Cadnant, 4 in Ottery St. Catchpole, the Muggles who lived next door to the Fawcetts, and 1 Auror who'd been first on the scene in Wales and had walked into a killing curse. 14 dead. Including children. Ron was white-faced, gripping the edge of the table. His family was safe. Molly had sent a Patronus message within minutes of the attack, but the proximity was terrifying. Ottery St. Catchpole was home. The street the Death Eaters burned was the one Ron had grown up walking. Hermione was already at the map on the wall, plotting attack locations, looking for patterns. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was doing what it always did, working the problem. Neville was still. The kind of stillness that Harry had learned to recognize as Neville at his most focused, the stillness before action. "This is because of us," Ron said. "No," Harry said sharply. "This is because of Voldemort. But we weakened the defenses. The Prophet's been hammering the Ministry and the Order for weeks. Dumbledore's been distracted, the Aurors are demoralized, the public's confused, Ron." Harry's voice cut through like a knife. "Voldemort has been building an army for a year. He recruited the werewolves months ago. The Dementors left Azkaban in June. These attacks were planned long before the first Prophet article ran. He's not doing this because we weakened anyone, he's doing this because he's ready." Ron stared at him. Then he nodded, not entirely convinced but willing to trust Harry's assessment. "Elara," Harry said into the mirror. "I want a special edition. Full coverage, all 3 attacks. Casualty reports, ministry response times, everything." Elara's voice came back tight and professional. "Already on it. Rita's at the DMLE getting official statements. Marcus Belby has contacts in Coombe Cadnant who can give us eyewitness accounts. But Harry, what angle do we take? The angle is the truth. The attacks happened. The ministry's response was slow. The order was somewhere else. The public was unprotected. We don't blame, we report. And then we ask the only question that matters: what are we going to do about it? That's an editorial, not a news piece. Then write both. Run the news on the front page and the editorial on page 2. And Elara, the boy in Wales. Emrys Cadwallader. The one who fought back. What about him? He's the story. Not the Death Eaters, not the ministry failures, the kid who picked up a wand and fought. That's what people need to see right now. Not victims. Fighters." Elara was quiet for a beat. "That's good. That's really good. I have my moments." The mirror went dark. Harry turned to the others. "I need to see Amelia Bones. Tonight, if possible. Hermione, can you, already drafting the message?" She was at the desk, quill flying. "I'll send it by Goblin Courier. Griphook can arrange a meeting within hours. Ron, your dad. Can you reach him?" "Yeah. He's at the ministry, everyone's been called in. Tell him I need to know what the Aurors are actually dealing with. Not the press statements, the real numbers. How many Death Eaters, how many dark creatures, what the ministry's actual capacity is. He won't want to share classified information, and I respect that, but he needs to understand that this isn't for the paper. This is for the war." Ron grabbed a pinch of flu powder and was gone. Neville. DA networks active. Luna's in contact with the Welsh families, her dad runs the Quibbler from near there. She says the survivors are scared but angry. They want to fight. Good. Start thinking about training. Not Dumbledore's army, something bigger. A real network, coordinated, with communication and response protocols. If the ministry can't protect these communities, the communities need to protect themselves. Neville's eyes lit up. It was the first time Harry had seen him look anything other than grim all evening. "I can do that. The DA training protocols are a start, but we'd need, whatever you need. Budget, materials, locations. Draw it up and I'll fund it through Obsidian Press as a community defense initiative. Elara can run it as a public interest campaign." "Harry." Hermione had stopped writing and was looking at him. "You just went from newspaper owner to resistance leader in about 30 seconds. I've been a resistance leader since I was 11. I just didn't have the infrastructure." Hermione stared at him. Then she shook her head, something between exasperation and admiration on her face, and went back to her letter. The night ground on. Reports came in. The casualty count held at 14. The Aurors eventually arrived at all 3 scenes, too late to help but in time to document the damage. The dark mark hung over 3 communities like a brand, and the wizarding world went to bed that night knowing, in a way that press conferences and newspaper articles couldn't convey, that the war was no longer something that happened to other people. At 3 in the morning, with Hermione and Ron asleep in their respective rooms and Neville dozing on the study couch, Harry sat at the kitchen table and stared at the front page layout that Elara had sent through the mirror. The headline, Night of Terror, 14 dead in coordinated attacks. Below it, the story of Emrys Cadwallader, 15 years old, half-blood, fought a Death Eater with an illegally carried wand and survived. Colin Creevy's photograph showed the boy in a hospital bed, bandaged and defiant, holding his wand in his uninjured hand. Below that, Elara's editorial. We have spent weeks telling you difficult truths about the institutions that govern our world. Some of those truths have been painful. Some have been costly. One man is dead because the truth was more than he could bear, and we carry that weight. But tonight, the cost of silence is 14 lives. 14 people are dead because the Dark Lord is at war and our defenses are insufficient. Not because of what the Prophet has published. Not because Dumbledore's reputation has been questioned. Because the systems we built to protect us were never strong enough, and the people we trusted to maintain them chose secrecy over strength. The question is no longer who is to blame. The question is, what comes next? We propose an answer: truth. Not as a weapon, but as a foundation. A wizarding world that faces its problems honestly is a wizarding world that can solve them. A society that knows its weaknesses can shore them up. A people who trust their institutions, because those institutions have earned trust through transparency, not demanded it through silence, will fight harder, stand firmer, and survive longer. 14 people died tonight. We owe them better than the world that killed them. We owe them the truth. Harry read it. Read it again. Then he approved it, sent it back through the mirror, and sat alone in the kitchen of the old house, listening to the grandfather clock tick and the war build, and wondering if the truth was enough. It had to be. It was all he had. He pulled Daphne's card from his pocket, cream parchment, embossed DG, the tiny handwriting on the back. He held it for a moment, thinking of gray eyes and a voice that didn't soften the truth but didn't use it as a bludgeon either. He put the card away. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight was for the dead. Tomorrow was for the living. The printing press was running. The owls were waiting. And in a few hours, the world would wake up to a newspaper that told them the truth about their war, their leaders, and themselves. Harry didn't know if it would be enough. But he knew one thing that Dumbledore had never understood: you couldn't save people by lying to them. You could only save people by trusting them with the truth and hoping, praying, that they were strong enough to carry it. He'd bet everything on that hope. His fortune, his reputation, his life. Now all he could do was wait to find out if he was right. Chapter 4, Enemy of My Enemy, Primary Challenge, Betrayal plus Large-Scale Combat plus Alliance Building. Word target, 12,000 to 14,000 core arc, the three-faction war intensifies. Harry must build, not just destroy. A betrayal rocks his inner circle. A massive battle forces unlikely alliances. The romance solidifies under fire. Key beats, three factions, the wizarding world has split. Dumbledore's order, diminished but still powerful. Harry's coalition, dubbed the Fourth Estate by supporters, goblins, neutral families, reform-minded ministry workers, Amelia Bones's DMLE division. Voldemort's Death Eaters, growing, emboldened by the chaos. Harry realizes he can't just be an opposition force, he needs to offer an alternative. The Reform platform, the Prophet publishes Harry's vision: Goblin rights, werewolf integration, ministry transparency, abolition of blood status laws, independent judiciary. It's radical by wizarding standards. It wins him allies. The Greengrass and Davis families formally align with him. The Weasley twins pledge financial support and use their shop as an intelligence hub. Amelia Bones quietly begins sharing DMLE intelligence. Even some Slytherin families, Zabini, not Junior, signal interest. They're not Death Eaters, they're just tired of being ruled by extremists on both sides. The betrayal. Harry discovers that information about his movements has been reaching Dumbledore. He suspects several people before the truth emerges. Creature. The house elf, still bound to Grimmauld Place and still loyal to proper wizards, has been reporting to Dumbledore through the Hogwarts elf network. Harry feels the betrayal keenly. He treated Creature better after Sirius's death, tried to honor Sirius's memory. The resolution is complex. Harry doesn't punish Creature but binds him with a direct order of silence, then has a painful conversation with the elf about what loyalty actually means. Creature, confused by a master who doesn't hit him, begins a slow transformation. Daphne and Harry, the turn, working late at Grimmauld Place. Daphne and Harry are going over Wisengamot vote counts. The tension that's been building for weeks breaks naturally, not with a dramatic kiss in the rain, but with Daphne's hand brushing his over a document, Harry catching her eye, and a long, honest look. "This is a terrible idea," she says. "I know," he says. "Your political position, I don't care about my political position right now." They kiss. It's quiet, real, and earned. Afterwards, she doesn't become a different person. She's still sharp, still challenging. But there's a warmth between them now that anchors both. The goblin's agenda surfaces. Ragnok requests a private meeting. He reveals what the goblins truly want: access to the sealed vault beneath Gringotts, which contains goblin-forged weapons and artifacts confiscated after the 1612 rebellion. The Ministry keeps the key. Ragnok wants Harry to use his political influence to get it. Harry is sympathetic but cautious. He's starting to see that everyone around him has their own, greater good. He tells Ragnok he'll advocate for goblin rights through proper channels, but he won't steal from the Ministry. Ragnok accepts this, outwardly. Griphook, listening from the shadows, is less patient. The Battle of Diagon Alley. Voldemort launches his most ambitious attack yet, a full assault on Diagon Alley in broad daylight. 50 Death Eaters, Giants, and Dementors. The intent is terror and destruction, but also a specific target, Gringotts itself. Voldemort wants to breach the bank and retrieve something from the Lestrange vault, his Hufflepuff Cup Horcrux, though Harry doesn't know this yet. The battle is massive, chaotic, and brutal. Harry fights alongside Aurors and, awkwardly, Order members. He duels Bellatrix Lestrange in a running fight through collapsing shops. It's personal. She killed Sirius, violent, and ends with Harry blasting her through a wall with a cursed chain that shocks even the Aurors watching. She apparates away, wounded. Neville holds a defensive line with a group of DA members who happen to be shopping. He's commanding, brave, and effective, a leader in his own right. Dumbledore arrives late in the battle and is magnificent. He duels 3 Death Eaters simultaneously, shields an entire block of civilians, and drives back a giant with a single spell. Harry sees it and feels the contradiction tear at him. This is the man who would sacrifice a child, and also the man who just saved 50 lives without breaking a sweat. The goblins fight too, defending Gringotts with a ferocity that surprises everyone. Goblin war magic is different from wizard magic, metallic, grinding, based on enchanted weapons and wardcraft. They hold the bank. The Death Eaters fail to breach it. Casualties: Florian Fortescue killed. Madame Malkin critically injured. 7 Aurors dead. 23 civilians wounded. The cost is real and felt. Aftermath and truce. In the rubble of Diagon Alley, Dumbledore approaches Harry. No pretense, no grandfatherly facade. Just 2 exhausted men who know they're on the same side against a greater evil, even if they can't stand each other's methods. Dumbledore proposes, suspend the propaganda war until Voldemort is dealt with. Harry counteroffers, he'll stop attacking Dumbledore personally, but the prophet continues publishing truth. If Dumbledore shares information about the Horcruxes openly, Harry will print it. Dumbledore hesitates, then agrees. It's not trust. It's necessity. The Elder Wand, a captured Death Eater, under Veritaserum, reveals that Voldemort is hunting for the Wand of Destiny. Dumbledore's hand, already blackened and cursed, the gaunt ring, tightens on his own wand. Harry notices. He doesn't know the significance yet, but Daphne does. She's read about the Deathly Hallows. She tells Harry the legend that night. His blood runs cold when he looks at Dumbledore's wand with new eyes. Voldemort subplot: Voldemort visits Nurmengard prison. He confronts Grindelwald, who is old, defiant, and laughs in his face. You will never understand the wand, Tom. It has already chosen its master, and he is better than both of us. Voldemort kills him and takes the information he needs. He now knows the Elder Wand belongs to Dumbledore. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.